Today, we're going to be talking about the basics of Power Apps. So we'll be going through and doing a little tutorial. We had a workshop yesterday afternoon where we went through a lot of the basics in the workshop. And what we did, we were going down this outline of beginner level topics. And what we did was we started a new fresh application. And we started off keeping track of, out of everything you could keep track of in the world, we kept track of dad jokes. And we put our dad jokes in a database. And I believe one of the really the things that you should master if you're trying to get the basics under your belt with Power Apps is learn how to use a gallery control and also a form control. So there are your listing records, you're reading the records, you can edit the records. We even have a delete button that deletes. We add a new record, we save, pretty much doing the 4 database operations. And guys, when I was learning computer programming back in 1998, somewhere around there, I had this guy named Kurt that taught me at a community college. And at the very end of the level 1 programming in Visual Basic, he said, guys, listen up. If you can read a record, write a record, process a record, you could work beside me. You could work out in the world actually doing this professionally, because it always comes down to data, being able to read data, write data, delete data, the four basic operations with records. And so that's what we got down yesterday. We did those 4 different operations using the gallery and the form here. And I thought what would be a good thing to do to sort of build on that is to talk about the other basics that you would consider basics beyond just using a gallery, a form, and messing with data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a new screen because there's a lot of other basics that we should look at here. So I'm going to move things around a little bit. And guys, we're going to keep an eye on the chat as we go along today. And I love to see some interaction from the audience. And if you're at the workshop or if you're an accelerator student, you're always welcome to come on as a panelist here in Restream. If you share your video, I'll bring you on. And if you hide your video, I'll take that as a clue to take you off. So one thing I'd like to do is talk about some individual controls. Okay, so when you open up a new, fresh Canvas Power Apps application, you're presented something that looks like this, except there'll just be one screen here. And essentially what you want to do is start adding controls to a screen. Okay, so I'm going to add a very basic type of control. You can do all kinds of things with, which is a rectangle. I love the rectangle control. Kurt or Rick, have you ever used a rectangle control to do something useful in Power Apps?
Yeah.
Or is it just me?
No, that's it. In the old days, you had shapes. Remember, you had all kinds of different shapes you could use. I think Visual Basic had a bunch of shape controls, and we just have a rectangle control here. So
yeah.
But basically, you can use that to do quite a bit.
Yeah, I started using the rectangle control to create a little horizontal line. So you can make this you set the height to like 1 or 2 pixels and it essentially becomes a line. Yep. You can have a square, rectangle, all kinds of stuff like that. Now, for those of you who might, notice this rectangle control and think, oh, well, this is great. I'll start using this for all kinds of different things. I should mention that there is another control that has come about called a container. Okay, so let me bring a container over here and let's talk about the differences between these 2 controls. Okay, as a beginner, you should be familiar with both of these controls. And I'm really starting to favor the container control over this rectangle control in a lot of ways that I would used to use the rectangle control. In that the container will actually contain other controls, So if I use this as a header over a gallery or something at the top of the screen, you could almost do the exact same thing with this rectangle control. Let me see if I can grab the color here that's being used for this rectangle control. So whenever you select a control, you're going to see all these properties here. And what I did is I went to the fill property, and you could simply copy that value, and I can go over to the container, and I can paste in the value there, and I should have exactly the same thing. Okay. Now, if we're using this rectangle as a background to some other controls, let's add in a text input control here. You say, oh yeah, this is going to be a little space where people can enter some data. Okay. And then later on, it's like, oh, I want to move this rectangle down. And really, you wanted this text box to move down with it. Well, if we had used a container control like this and then moved it around, you see how it's sort of self-contained there. Something else I've noticed about the container control, and I don't think it's been there since the release of the container control, but you've got this drop shadow that you can have here. You guys see that? It's a little subtle, even though I made it really bold. So we've got that. So when you add controls from the menu, the ribbon here at the top, yeah, so Lil Ju brought up a great point here. Edges can be rounded compared to a rectangle. That's another reason why I like containers over rectangles. Absolutely. So if I go over here and you would modify the border radius, let's make that something like 10. Okay. And you can see it's much more noticeable. Maybe if we made it 40, we could see it even more. So there's that's a very nice feature. I really do like that. But what I want to do is focus on the basics of when you bring a control over to your screen, there are all these properties that you can change. Okay, like the color. We can set up a border around something that we're working with there. So here for this rectangle, I'll change the border color to be this maroon color and changed it to be 5 pixels in width. Okay. And so what a control is, if you ever hear that word control, it is a graphical user interface item or component that you can have there on your screen visually that the user typically will either look at or interact with. And we've had these controls. Kurt, I remember when I was learning Visual Basic, we had controls in Visual Basic, right? But what about before Visual Basic? Did we still have these things called controls in other platforms and languages? Or was it around?
No, you had to build them. You had to build your objects. Visual Basic was the first one that kind of created the objects for you and gave you a template of your objects. And that's why we used to call Visual Basic wasn't really object oriented. It was object like oriented, right? Because it wasn't, you didn't have all the principles of object oriented programming with it, but you still had the objects. But before then, when you had Delphi and Pascal and all that, you had to create those. Now, I think Microsoft started off with their active template libraries with C++, and the active template libraries allowed you to have what do you call it, blueprints for all the different things like text boxes and whatnot.
Okay.
But now we have C#, and you have all the objects in there with it, just like you did with Visual Basic.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think from myself, when I hear the word control, I'm like, oh yeah, control. But if you're a complete beginner, somebody says control, what do you mean? I'm trying to exert my will upon something, control, to either move something around or to manipulate it in some way. It's these little visual objects that you can bring over to your canvas or your screens here. Okay.
And I think if you wanted to try to differentiate the difference between an object and a control is something that you can actually, like you got on the screen right there, that you actually can drag and drop and you can visualize on the screen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? Let's give an example of an object that isn't control inside of Power Apps here. So I'm going to bring over another control here momentarily, a label. And if we want to display something up here, a little dynamic, what we could do is we could say app. Well, app is an object within Power Apps.
Yeah.
It's not a control. It doesn't have a visual element here, but I could say app.ActiveScreen.name.
Yeah.
Okay, and you can see that it says screen 3 here. I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so we could do something like that. One of the most basic things that anyone would want to do with any platform, it's typically the first thing that people do with something like this, is you have some type of example where you say hello world. Okay, so here's a label, and we can say hello world. Okay, make this bigger. So at least we've done that today. I feel like our work is complete here. You pretty much, if you can do a hello world, you've taken your first step in the basics, right? So now that we have a label over here, some basic properties that you would have on something like this and a lot of the other controls is we have the font that we can change. We can change this to Dancing Script. Now, Dancing Script is actually Rick's favorite font, and he uses it in all of his apps. So I like to showcase
all the time. I'm a big dancer.
So yeah, we could change this to like bold. Well, that sort of changes it sort of changed it there a bit. Let's see. There we go. We can make it italicized. It already looked italicized there for a moment. But these are all the things that you can change of a lot of these controls. I mean, a rectangle doesn't have any text being displayed, but if we were to add a button here, okay, we could either double click on this button and just start typing, new button, okay, or you can go over here and change it. Got that. Now, something that you'll notice is that we got this weird blue color all over the place now. And this is actually part of a theming. Now, there's all kinds of different ways you can do theming inside of Power Apps, okay? So if you go up here to the top and you go look at themes, we've got some themes. Now this is where this blue color is coming from, okay? And these are the themes that we have to choose from. And I'm not really impressed by any of them, to be honest. What I do like to do is pick this light theme, because chances are you have your own colors and styles that you want to implement in your application. That's probably going to be decided by the published style guide for the organization that you're working with or for. Typically, a medium to large size organization will have these things called style guides, and they're typically a PDF file, and they could range from 3 to 30 or how many ever pages they want to put in there, and they will describe exactly what you need to do if you're going to create a website for that organization or an application, what colors you're allowed to use, what fonts you should use, all these types of things that dictate the look and the feel and the styling for anything that organization does. And I recommend that you base everything from that. You ask them for their style guide. If it's a smaller organization, a mom and pop store, you might ask them for their style guide, and they might be like, what? You want a guide to do what? And if that's the case, a lot of times what you might want to do, because if you say, hey, tell me what colors you want and give me your best logo. Well, they might be like, oh, I need to do this. I need to do this right, because they're going to do a website. And then they could like not get back to you for a few weeks because they're off like, oh, I've got to, come up with something very definite to give to this developer. In those cases, I almost don't even ask for a style guide if they're a smaller organization. I go to their website. And if the chances are they've got their logo there, they've got their colors they're already using on their website. And I'll typically start with that. And I'll say, hey, how do you like this? Does this look good to you? Does this represent, the look and the feel and the styling of your organization? And a lot of times they're like, oh, I love it, And so I thought I'd touch on that, the styling there that we have available to us, these themes. Now, Power Apps has released a new set of controls called modern controls. Okay, so if we go into the properties here, these are a new set of controls that look a little better, and it seems like Microsoft wants us to use these now over the classic ones. Now, I think it is here within the trying to remember exactly, and sometimes they do move these things around here. But if I do a search for modern, okay, here's something. Keep classic themes. So that thing that I just showed you with the themes, those are considered classic themes. Okay. Kurt, help me find where the modern controls at here.
They're in the general.
It is okay. Then general. For some reason I was going down to display. Thank you. Right. So we'll go down here in general, and there we go. Modern controls and themes. Okay, we could turn that on. And what I recommend, if you ever want to start using these modern controls, make sure you go in and before you turn them on, go to this theme and pick this gray light theme, because no matter what theme you go with, white, black, and shades of gray typically will go with any type of theme. So you want to set this up, because once you go in here and you turn on modern controls and themes, then it tries to get rid of the old theming stuff. So if we hadn't done that, we turn this on, we would have had a lot of blue stuff in here, you know. So I'd like to turn that on and start using gray colors rather than something like this blue color. And now what you'll notice, now that we've turned that on, is when we try to insert a control now, we've got a whole new set of controls that we can use. Okay, so we've got a button here we can bring over. And okay, well, it went into this into this container, which I didn't want. So I'm going to cut that out, and I'm going to click on the screen, and I'll paste here. Now I can move this around, and you notice these buttons are a little smaller than the classic one. So if I bring over another classic button control, you can see the size differences. So I think the classic traditional way that you would have a Power Apps application, you have very large, maybe even clunky looking blocky things where, you know, the controls are bigger, so maybe you don't fat finger accidentally hit another control or something, you know. But it seems like the modern way, the more preferred, more, dare I say, elegant way is to use these modern controls. And in general, they're a little bit smaller than the classic ones. So I thought I'd point that out. Now, we do have modern theming now. So if I go in and I'm going to go look for the theming. So it's over here on the side. Okay. I'm going to move us around so we can see more of this. Okay. Now we can pick between all of these themes, and these look a little better. So you can pick from one of these. So if I pick teams, which is more of like a purple, you'll notice that this one modern button that I brought over is now has a purple tint to it, color. Okay. And if we change this over to, let's say, a SharePoint style or a red style, okay, so you're implementing a new way of theming here. When I build applications, I always like to use dynamic theming that is based on variables. That allows me to change the theme very quickly, easily, and I have an infinite amount of themes that I could create based on all kinds of different colors. Where here it's like a boilerplate. You know, you're just picking from 8 different themes and that's it. So let's say your company uses purple and you pick this team's theme. It might clash with the company's purple theme. So that's why I generally don't like to use these built-in themes within Power Apps. All right. So What else can we do? Let's add in another control here. Let's bring over an image control. And what you'll notice in this image control is it does have an image property. So if I click on image, or you find image over here in this dropdown, it's using this sample image. And the sample image is a keyword within Power Apps, and in it, it contains this sample image that you see there. Now, something we could do is we could tie into the user function and look at the image for that user. And this is an image of the Kung Fu Master from a movie called Kill Bill. And that's what I use as my profile photo here in this particular tenant. So we can add images easily to a Power Apps application. So the whole point of bringing all these controls over and going into everything that I did here was to show you all kinds of different controls that you can add, and also how to configure these controls, changing the properties. Okay, so all of these properties here, whether it's visible or not, it's position, it's X and Y, it's width and height. These properties are called declarative type of properties. Almost, I would say 95% of the properties you come across with these controls, they're declarative. It's like a one value, like this color. Okay, if I click on color, you can see the actual property name is fill. It always comes down to one value, and sometimes the types are different. In this case, it's a color type. But if I go over here to the X property, it's a numeric type. But it always comes down to a single value. Okay, so what other types of properties do we have besides declarative? So here's a button. Okay, I'm going to bring it to the top, move us around a little bit. And typically when you add a button to a program, you want something to happen when the user clicks on the button. Okay, so what you'll begin to find as you start to work more and more with these controls is that there will be properties that start with the prefix on click. If we add a checkbox, let's bring that over to the screen here. We have a checkbox. And if we go over to the properties that start with on, we have on check, on select, and on uncheck. So all these properties that start with the prefix on are imperative type of properties. That means you can have multiple lines of code that will execute, and you separate the lines of code with a semicolon. So I just wanted to mention the distinction there between declarative and imperative type of properties. Now, Kurt, back in our day, when we talked about a button or an object in general, we would say an object has properties and methods and events. And it seems like here in Power Apps, they just sort of push them all together and just talk about properties in general, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess they don't want to get people to hung up too much on the terminology. Maybe they just throw it all together.
Yeah. And just a word on since we've talked about it here, object-oriented programming. You might think, well, here in Power Apps, we can't really create our own classes and things, but you sort of can. If you think about it, if you go over to components, now this is more of an intermediate, dare I say, advanced topic, creating components. You're going to be creating your own controls. Okay. And you'll start to, you can create your own declarative properties and imperative properties and a lot of those things. So in a way, it sort of is object-oriented. It's not a fully object-oriented platform, at least not yet. So, all right. So we have learned about all kinds of different controls. Kurt, are there any controls that you really like that you feel like you would want a beginner to know about? And
well, and some of that is not just the control, but how to use them too. So like you have a checkbox, you got radio buttons. Now we didn't really talk about radio buttons. I think those are important because they represent the condition. right? So when you're looking at a lot of programming, one of the precepts of programming, one of the principles is conditional branching. And when you're looking at evaluating criteria, you got two things. You have and you have or. So when you're anding two different sets, both things have to be true. So you have this is true and that is true. But if you're oring something, it's one or the other. It's either this is true or that is true, right? One of those things have to be true. So a checkbox is a great way to represent an and, because if they're both checked, then they're and. And then if you have a radio button, which he's got up there, that's a good way to represent the or, because only one of those things has to be true, right?
Hey.
So it's really, I think it's really important to understand those two, those two controls, how to use those, but why you're using them and when you're using them. And I know I probably complicated a ham sandwich there, but I think if we can talk about that a little bit, maybe we can take some of the mystery out of it.
Yeah, I think we should. I think we should unpack that a little more. And dare I say, break out the crayons.
Yeah.
Let's do that. So you had mentioned, before I took any programming classes, what they would make you do is take a class called Logic. And they would teach you things like how to do a flow chart and writing pseudocode. It wasn't really code, but you're sort of designing or planning out what your code's going to do before you actually sit down at a computer and start writing the code. So you touched on a good basic principle of and an or. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to know if, let's say, somebody lives in Florida. If you've lived in Florida,
the other Florida though.
The other Florida? Did I type that wrong?
The one that's got an L in it.
Oh, thank you. Let's see here. Let's change the font size to 20 so I can see it a little better. So let's say we've got a little label over here that will display at the bottom as they're on the screen. And for this checkbox, this is something we talked about yesterday. You should always name your controls with meaningful names. So if it's a checkbox, it should have a CHK at the beginning. And I'll say FL. And for Illinois, I'm going to call this checkbox CHKIL. And I've got this label here that's going to tell me if I'm cool or not.
I can answer that if you're cool or not.
So if you've lived in Florida, and we can get at if they checked it or not, what the value is, if the value, okay, is true. Now, Kurt, do you say is true like this all the time?
Nope. But maybe it's good to do it for now, though, right? And then we can talk about that in a little bit, huh?
Yeah, we probably should. Yeah,
because I want people that don't know how to program to be able to wrap their mind around what we're doing here. Absolutely. But then we do need to have that conversation, though.
Yeah, I think we should. I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit more here. Okay, and so we've got this label here, and we're looking at these two controls that we named. Okay, and if somebody checked off Florida and it's true, then we're like, hey, you might be cool. Okay, so if I hold down Alt on my keyboard, I can sort of run it as it's sitting right there. I'm going to check off the Florida, and it's going to say maybe you might be cool. Okay, but if we wanted to make sure,
let's talk about that for just a second before we go on. That's pretty good stuff right there, Darren. Just a perfect example right here. I want everybody to understand what you're doing here. So the if function, now we talked about this in the workshop a little bit, but I want to talk about it again because it's so important. The if function, everything's a function in Power Apps. In every language, you have conditional branching, you have iteration, and you have statements. Okay. And if you know how to handle all three of those things in each language, then you know how to program in that language, essentially. Okay. So it's just about syntax now. So the syntax, We have to do conditional branching in Power Apps. Conditional branching is using an if.
I sort of want to stop you there because you said something that I feel like people would pay big money for that might be on a test if you were teaching a class.
Oh, yeah, it would be on a test.
You said with any programming language or app creation platform like this, you'll have, I think you said there's iteration.
Yeah, which means looping. You have to be able to repeat it. So in the world of, think about the world of programming and problem solving. It's no different than production. Think about mass producing things, right? We learn how to build a widget, whatever that widget is, whatever that thing is that we're building. We learn how to build it one time, and then we learn how to repeat that process in an efficient manner, right? That's what production is. So programming is no different than production. So we learn how to solve a problem one time, and then we learn how to repeat that problem in an efficient manner. That's called iteration. So in every language, you have to have iteration. Otherwise, like if you're processing, this is great. This Hello World program that you've written up here is great. But if we were processing if we had a program for General Motors and you had 5 million customers, you had to be able to do this for 5 million customers now. This would take a very long time to do this all day, every day, right? So we learn how to do this in a way to repeat it, okay? For 5 million times if we need to. Now we have conditional branching. Conditional branching is within that iteration, we're either going to go down this path if certain criteria happen. If something happens to be true, we're going to go down this path. Otherwise, we're going to go down another path. Now, that other path might be another conditional branch, right? It might be, now we got to check this. So if this is true, we'll go down here. Else, we're going to go check this condition to see if this is true. And if that's not true, else, we're going to go and check that condition to see if that's true. And we're going to go so on down the line until something resolves to be true or not, right? And so that's your iteration. So if you have, I'm sorry, that was conditional branching. If you have iteration and you have conditional branching, and then you have statements. Now, a statement is nothing but an instruction, telling somebody what to do. Like I tell Rick to put his glasses on. That's a statement. Right. And they always talk about how computers are so smart, right? These computers are so smart. They're actually the dumbest thing in the world. They're the dumbest thing in the world because you got to tell them everything, exactly everything, what to do.
Unless they're AI.
I was going to say, Kurt, you better watch it in case they come after you. Kurt said that, not me or Dan.
You're probably right.
I'm sure machines have got databases that has Kurt's name in it. It says that they're dumber than a box of rocks.
That's it.
That's probably, yeah. So
I, for one, welcome our insect overlords.
So me telling Rick to put on his glasses, we have this thing called fuzzy logic. Now that's a whole nother, that we could have a whole live stream on fuzzy logic. Okay. In fact, I might have to talk about that for just a little bit. But
now, is that something I should add to this? We've got iteration, conditional branching, we got statements, and you said fuzzy logic. Should I add?
No.
Okay.
Fuzzy logic uses those three things to do something like, okay, here's a statement of fuzzy logic. Okay. The first time, and that's why I was telling you guys that computers are the stupidest things, because you actually have to tell them every little thing. If I say, Rick, go put on your glasses. Well, Rick has put his glasses on so many times that he has a fuzzy logic that he just knows, he just goes down and does it. It's just muscle memory. He doesn't have to think. So if I was going to tell a computer to put Rick's glasses on, we would have to say, move Rick's hand, make them touch the glasses, and you had to move it certain what you got to find out where the glasses are. You have to tell how far to move the hand. You have to tell the hand to pick the glasses up, squeeze your fingers. You have to do all these little steps just to get your glasses on, right? We probably do a million things, a million steps in doing that, but we do it in one graceful move because we've got muscle memory and we call fuzzy logic. Okay. And but with computers, you don't have that. Like with Power Apps, we don't have that. We've got to tell Power Apps every little thing. So that statement, instructions, is very important. So iteration, conditional branching, and statements. Now, I want to suggest to you guys that programming is the simplest thing. In fact, when I was learning how to program in school the first time, we didn't have like Pascal class and C# and Visual Basic. We just had computer programming. And somebody would say, okay, well, for this homework assignment, we're going to move the knight on a chess table. And today we're going to do it in C++. So you had to learn how to do it in C++, you know, because you just had to learn those three things: iteration, conditional branching, and statements. So when somebody says, how many languages can you program? I say all of them, if I just have time to look at the syntax, because it's just syntax now. So I said all that to say, in Power Apps, we have a syntax. The syntax is the language, the lexicon, the way we talk to it. So we want to do, in this case, we're trying to do conditional branching. And we have a visual representation of conditional branching with the checkbox and the radio buttons. But within that, we have an if function. The if function controls all of that. The if function in Power Apps is their way, Power Apps way of conditional branching. So when we have an if function, now when we talk about a function, we have to talk about the anatomy of a function. What is a function? Well, that's not new stuff. That's been around since Socrates, back in the Greek days, back with the mathematicians. They had these big old long walls and walls and walls of formulas, and they said we need to compact that down so we don't have to keep repeating that every time. So they put that whole wall, because they had to write it up in chalk, right? And they put that whole wall of numbers and formulas, and they put it into one function. And this function does all that work for you, okay? And it's got one purpose. It returns a value. It returns a value. So every function has to return a value. It might return nothing, but that's nothing is at least returning something, right? So then when we have that one value being returned, now that's number one step of a function. But then a function is not very useful unless you can put different values and plug different values into that function. So let's say if we had a function to add two numbers, you have x and y, you have parameters. So I'm going to have x equal one value and y equal another. And now I can have a function say sum equals x plus y. Now I can just plug any number into x and any number into y and add those two numbers together, and you have a function that can return the sum of those two values. So now within that, you have parameters and you have return. The if function has three parameters. Okay, this is what Darren. Now I said all that to get to Darren's thing. What he put up there on the screen triggered all that soliloquy that I just threw at you. Okay, I hope you guys can understand it, because this is really important. If you're going to try to be a programmer, this is really important to understand this at every level. So that first parameter is the criteria. They call that a criteria, and that has to be true. It's got to result to true. That the end of it has to be true. Okay. Now you could put a not in front of that and make it false, but if it is false, then that is true. Right? So that criteria is what is going to delegate whether you're going to go to the second parameter or to the third parameter. Right? If it's true, if this thing results to true, we're going to go to the second parameter. In other words, they live in Florida. That's checked. Oh, that's true. So the computer says, oh, Darren's cool, maybe. And then else, he's not. He's not. And that's going to return one of those two things. So that text, now you look at that, you look at the text label. Now he's putting this into a label, right?
Yeah.
And you'll look over there at the properties called text. And that text is a text property. The data type, if you look at the data type there, it's text. So it's going to return the text there. Very cool. You see he's got that in double quotes on both sides of that. Very cool is surrounded in double quotes. That's a string literal. That's text. Okay. Not so cool is a string literal. It's in quotes. That is text. Those two things have to match. So it's going to equal something. That text value is going to equal the output of that if function. That if function is going to return either very cool or not so cool. One of those two things.
I like that. So pretty much what you were saying, Kurt, if I'm not mistaken, is any development language going back to whatever, let's say COBOL. I know COBOL probably wasn't the very first language, but what I was told before I took your Visual Basic class, the guy that taught me logic. I'm like, what programming language should I go after? He says, COBOL. It's been around for 50 years. Will be around for another 50 years. So that's what I signed up for. And it took just about like a week or two. And I decided I did not like all these black monochrome screens and all this stuff. And I ended up taking Visual Basic from you. But, you know, in COBOL, you've got if then else statements. You know, in JavaScript, you've got if then else statements. So no matter where you go. So this is good stuff that you guys are learning here. And I'm like, oh yeah, whatever. No. This is good that you start to develop. Somebody told me they're at that community college is like, Darren, as you're learning these programming concepts, it actually sort of changes the way they think. For example, when my wife tells me go to the grocery store and pick up a gallon of milk, if they have eggs, pick up 2 dozen. Well, I would go to the grocery store. I pick up a gallon of milk, put that in there. I'd go see if they have a dozen eggs, and they do have a dozen eggs. So I go back and get a dozen more milk jugs of milk because my thinking has been messed up as a programmer, and now I am now as dumb as a box of rocks.
Yeah,
I don't get the street smarts.
Every little thing. You know, I used to always say you got to beware of literal thinking people, but that's exactly what computers are. It's very literal, right?
Absolutely.
That's true. Okay, so you know, so many times you and I, we're talking to people all the time. In fact, we ask people to, if you're interested in Power Apps, in your journey in Power Apps, we ask people to book a call with us because we offer different programs to help people with that. That's what Darren and I do. That's why we're here right now. We're here right now to offer. We're trying to empower people, you know, and so I get asked that, Darren, you get asked that, we get asked that many times. Well, I want to learn how to write programs right. I want to do it right. I want to learn the fundamentals. I went out there and I started working in Power Apps and I realized I don't know what I'm doing and I need to learn the fundamentals. Well, that's the fundamentals. The fundamentals are learning the iteration, learning the conditional branching, learning the syntax of the language, and the statements, and training your brain. That's why in the accelerator program we have these labs that I've got, and I've got these little challenges that I do. I even do it in the PPC a little bit, but just to train your brain to think in a way to make it more efficient, so that you can just like you were talking about how it messed you up with the grocery store. You know, you know, it's a funny story, but it's true, isn't it? You know. Yeah. And so that's what we have to do. That when people say, I want to learn how to do it right, I want to learn the fundamentals, sometimes you got to talk about this stuff. And I know it gets boring. I know it gets dry. That's why we try to throw a little color in there, a little humor in there, because, you know, it makes it more fun. You know, I got one more thing I want to say. You were talking about COBOL, so I have to do it. There's a story about a COBOL programmer. He died back in the 70s.
Is that because the rubber band broke and all of his cards that had the code like went everywhere?
Actually, in a lot of ways we say he died, but what he did was he was dying. He had cancer, and so he was trying to he
took a dark turn.
He freezed himself. Right. Took a dark turn.
So
he froze his
Happy
body.
Saturday, everybody.
He froze his body. Will you guys let me tell my story? So
hey, Rick, did I ever tell you my death? No, I'm sorry.
Let's change this.
Hey, I got a good story for you too after he's done.
So the man froze his body in the hopes that someday down in the future there's going to be a cure for this cancer, and then that way they can fix him and wake him up and fix him. Well, in the year 2000. 30 years later, you know, they were worried about the date. You guys remember the date problems, you know? So they woke this guy up and he says, oh, did you guys find a cure for cancer? They says, no, but you're a COBOL programmer and we're losing them. We need COBOL programmers right now, you know? In other words, COBOL's still going to be around. You may not be, but COBOL will be. That was the story. Is that
a true story?
No, it's not true. No, it's not true. It was.
So
it will be true in 20 years.
Shock you guys. When I was in the 7th grade, I thought, well, I want to learn how to program, you know, as well. And so now at this time, my experience, if you want to call it, was only MS-DOS, you know, way back when. And so I checked a book out of the library, my school library, about how to program, and it was over COBOL. And so here I am, a 7th grader. I take this book home. I look at it. I probably spent the week. I couldn't wait to turn that thing back in. I'm like, I didn't understand none of that stuff. It was crazy. So
No,
I guess I should have stuck with it, Kurt.
And I'm really glad you told that story because it really lends to what I want to say in this. And that is that you can sit here and read the book. You read the book and you had no context. You had nothing.
No.
So you're trying to remember this thing. And you're like, I'm never going to remember this thing. This thing's dry and it's stupid. I remember going and taking algebra. You guys remember the first time you had to take algebra and you're sitting in the class and you're just groaning. You're like, oh my God. I literally flunked algebra. I had no idea what I was doing. But then we had computers. And then I understood, oh my goodness, this is why we had algebra, because now I'm doing all this stuff with it. You were learning COBOL. And you can't learn programming. I used to say this to my students, and it's just, you were living proof. You can't learn programming by reading about it in a book. You can't learn programming by listening to me and Darren talking about it. You got to actually get your hands dirty and write some programs and learn what the hell is this thing doing, you know, and making mistakes and figuring your way out of them. And that's how you learn how to program, man. And you see me and Darren, some people think Darren and I are pretty good programmers, and I think we're pretty good. But that's because we've made a lot of mistakes.
At least decent. I wouldn't say I'm good. I would say I'm maybe decent.
No, I think you're good. And I think it's a testament. I think it's a testament to how many mistakes we've made and how many things we've had to work out of, because we've had to do it so much that we've got that muscle memory, like you putting your glasses on. And had you had the computer back then to be able to practice what you were reading, you would have been excited about it, I think. And you might have been, by now, you might have been an all-star programmer, you know?
Yeah.
But you are an all-star programmer because you're watching this right now. And anybody that's watching this right now, just the fact that you're sitting here right now, I have the utmost respect for you. The utmost.
I've heard it. Rick actually likes model trains.
I do too. I love them.
I do. They're awesome.
I used to build big dioramas of them. Yeah. I've gotten rid of them all, but I used to have thousands of dollars of model trains.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed of it.
Hey, they're worth a lot of money.
Yeah, I threw away a lot of money.
So we've learned about conditional branching with the if else. And you were saying, hey, with any programming language or platform like this, you've got iteration, conditional branching, and statements. Now, do we have a good example of a statement here? Have we used a statement anywhere just yet?
See, the funny thing about Power Apps is it was built on the Excel backbone, right? The Excel infrastructure. So the FX language is what they use, which meant FX means formula, right? And a formula is a bunch of functions. So Power Apps is written to be a function. So I suspect most everything in Power Apps is going to be in the form of a function, because in other languages, the if is an if statement, right? It's an if statement, but in Power Apps, it's an if function.
Yeah.
So, you know, you get, that's why when I went and took my journey into Power Apps, I had a hard time. Darren, I remember calling Darren so many times. I'm body slamming my monitor against the table. I'm so mad because I want a variable. I want C to equal, if I want last name to equal this text, you can't say last name equals some text. You can't do that in Power Apps. You have to think away from that statement type ideology. You have to go into this function ideology, which we just demonstrated.
Yeah. So for example, just to sort of illustrate what Kurt's talking about here, and it sort of messed me up. So we've got a text box here, and if I wanted my name to be inside this text box, I would have maybe a button here, and I would say, okay, what's the name of this text box? Is text input 2. So inside this button, I might say text input 2 dot text equals
exactly
Darren. Okay, I'm going to run this. I'm going to save it. I'm going to run it. I'm going to hit that button, and it does not change it. And it's exactly what Kurt just said. You got to, instead of doing something here, you can't really assign it there. What you have to do is go into that text box and put something here. Okay, so if I go down to this label here, it does have my name in it. What did I do? I put the value in here. It doesn't have to be what Kurt was talking about earlier, a string literal or a hard-coded value. It could be dynamic like this. But if you wanted a button to change the value of something like this, well, what you would need to do is create a variable. Okay. And a variable, using variables, declaring variables, and using variables in your apps, it's a basic. It's a basic, one of the basics that you should learn. Okay. So let's actually do that here.
Hopefully we get there. But, yeah, go ahead and finish your. Let me before you do that, let me show you something where you got that up there.
Okay.
So you said it when I was complaining to you on the phone. I would say, I'd talk, and you say, well, Kurt, that's because you're thinking like a programmer. You got to quit thinking like a programmer. And then I started thinking about Excel. You had told me how Excel, this was built from Excel. And if you think about Excel, think about that right there, what he's got right there in that on select. That's a cell. Think of that as a cell in an Excel spreadsheet. And you're going to put a value in there. Whatever that value is, that's going to go into that cell. So remember, if you had a cell, let's say it was C1, right? And C1, it was going to equal, you wanted it to be the value of A plus B, A1 plus B1. And it's just going to sit there. That's just going to sit there, and whatever you put in there, it's going to put that value in there for them, right? And so you got to think of your property boxes just as those are cells, and you are really you're essentially filling up a spreadsheet. You're populating a spreadsheet with formulas is what you're doing. So I wanted to talk about that once before you went and did the variable thing.
Yeah, this is good stuff. Just thinking about Excel, everybody knows about spreadsheets. And you see here at the top, you see a little FX in the middle of the screen there, that little bar, this expression bar, and it says FX. And it said FX, I don't know, probably before I got into computers, right? That's always been the FX. Yeah. So you can write some type of statement here. It could be, math, algebra. You could use functions in here. So that is the type of thinking or the way to approach things here in Power Apps. I just wanted to show that it's got that FX and it's got the bar up there.
Exactly. I'm glad you did, because that's what I was trying to visualize, what I was trying to explain. And I hope it makes sense to some people who are wanting to get into Power Apps and they're having a hard time with it, to kind of just think from this angle here, and maybe it'll help you.
So if we wanted to change the text in a text input, okay, what we would need to do instead of this is create a variable. And the simple way to create a variable is using the set keyword. And if you use the set keyword, it's going to be a global type of variable. And it's a recommended best practice from Microsoft that you start all your global variables with GBL, short for global. And I'm going to put in here name. And I'll use a comma, and I'll use an ending parenthesis. So you see here, as Kurt said a few moments ago, everything in Power Apps is a function. You want something to be done, you're going to use a function. And so here we've named our variable, and then we're going to put this in here. Now, if I double click on this is something we went over yesterday. That's actually really helpful to everybody at every level. If you don't know this, if you click on something, sometimes you just click in the middle and it'll do the same thing. But look, it's telling me the data type of this is text. Well, it could be numeric, right? And then what's the value? Right now it's blank. Nothing has been put in there. If I hold on Alt on my keyboard, I can go over and click on this button. Okay. Now, if I click here, now it's got the string Darren in there.
Now, wait a minute. You just threw some magic at me. What is this Alt? If I hold Alt, what did you just do, Darren? And why?
I hope that you actually know that. But yeah, you know how you hit run to run your program? Holding down Alt on your keyboard will actually sort of run it right there as it's sitting. So you actually click on something and it will run that code.
So if you hold the Alt key down, it will just run that stuff that you've got selected.
Well, it'll actually run the screen right there. It's almost as if you hit run, but it doesn't like blow it up like that. You know what I mean? So if I hold down Alt, I can click on that button. I could click over here. I could type. I could do all kinds of stuff. But the whole time I got my thumb on the Alt key.
Got it.
Yeah. Now, if we wanted this to change down here in this text input, instead of it saying text input, we would actually put that variable there. So that's how you get something. That's how you change something in a control like this text input.
If you want it to be dynamic, yeah.
Yeah.
If you want your and variables in every language. I mean, you can't write much of a program without using variables. You just can't. You can have, if you got hello world as a string literal, and beyond hello world, if you want it to be dynamic meaning changed, or have the user input something, or the input comes from some source, you've got to have variables out there somewhere. Something's got to be holding the information that you want to bring in somewhere. Otherwise, it's not going to be very useful of a program, right?
That's right.
And Rick, what makes a good program?
If someone keeps using it.
Yeah. And so people aren't going to use your program if they can't change the data. if they can't make any changes. So your program's not going to be used, and it's not going to be good. So learn variables. Yep. And then to go to the next level, after you learn variables, you need to learn collections, because that's what's going to take a program that's good and make it world class.
I like that. I'm going to do something here because I want to sort of drive home the concept of expressions before we go on too much further down the line of the concepts, the basic concepts.
Yeah.
Right here, let's call this slider, I'm going to give it a name of SLD slider, and I'm going to call this width. And then here for the height, I'm going to say SLD height. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a rectangle here. And I'll get the name of that, SLD width. And a rectangle has a width property. Okay, I'll put that there. The slider has a value. And then for the height, we'll say SLD height. I could put that in there. Dot value. I could save it, run it, and actually change. Well, it doesn't go very far, does it? Let's set this up, these little sliders, to take up the full width of the screen here. And let's make the maximum be the whole width of the screen, which would be, let's say, parent dot width. Okay. And then for the height, for the maximum, we'll say parent dot height. Okay. Now, if we run it, you can see that we're changing this rectangle. So you see how we can bind one control to the value of other controls. That's actually a really important thing to master on the basics. Something else that we can do that will drive home this concept is we add a little label here, and we want to calculate the area of this rectangle. What we would do here is we would say SLD height dot value multiply by SLD width dot value, and that should give us the area of that rectangle. Okay. Now is this square feet? Is this I guess square pixels? So that's an important thing to sort of understand. You could do the same thing with, let's say you're doing a shopping cart application. You've got price and you got quantity. Okay, so there might be something where you do some math and you bring things together with basic arithmetic. Okay. So we've gone over if statements. We've talked a little bit about variables. Okay. Trying to think of other basics that we want to cover today. Here on this first screen, I've got a little button here, and it says navigate to screen 2. So if you click on this button, it's going to take you over to screen 2. And then this button will take you back to the previous screen. Okay. All right, let's add yet another screen here. And let's talk about loops. Kurt, you mentioned while we were on this other screen here, we've got conditional branching, which we talked about, but you said, we should know iteration on any platform that we're learning as well. So let's actually utilize iteration here on this screen.
Yeah, so it turns out that in Power Apps, it's going to be hard to do iteration without understanding data. So I wonder, should we go just demonstrate how we can do a simple table, or should we talk about collections at some point here and how we can use collections? Because now we've got we've done basic controls with, you got labels and text boxes, and you got radio buttons and check boxes. But now we have other controls that are a little bit more complex control, which are so strong and powerful, such as a gallery, such as a drop-down list box, a list box. So drop downs and galleries are what I like to use the most. But things that require some sort of a data source, right? Some form of data source. And when we talk about data sources, the first thing I always think about is a table. But we don't necessarily need tables. We can also use things called collections, which is a matrix, which is it doesn't have to be a matrix. It's like an array. Okay. And then it's a table in memory. And then you actually have hard-coded brackets, which you can create a data source from that as well. So I don't know, Darren, how you want to go down that road. There's so many ways we could do that.
Yeah. You started talking about collections. Like collections, it's hard to talk about the iteration unless we have some type of collections. So I brought over a gallery control. Now, we talked at length about galleries yesterday, so I just brought one over. And a gallery is a list, a repeating control. Whatever you put in that first record will be repeated. Now, when I brought it over,
so that's iteration, isn't it? It's repeating. Right. So we got our first step of iteration right there with the gallery control. Just wanted to put that out there. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. So when we brought this gallery control over, you see it says custom gallery sample. This is a Power Apps keyword. Okay. That gives us a sample collection, a sample table value. Okay. And we can see that there's a downward chevron, and we can see what data is inside this collection. Okay. So we've got this gallery. Now, if we actually want to see what's in the underlying data here, we'll add a label, maybe add 2 labels. And maybe make this first record not so large there. So we'll see we do have 4 different items there. Now, if you want to see like a separator bar, I always make this a little medium gray. And then for the gallery, I'll go down to template fill and I'll say color.white. Okay. So we'll see we got 4 records, and they're the values.
Now,
okay.
Now, before you go any further, I just want to address something that's up in the comments right now. So Daniel Wolf just asked, is there any negative effect using only global variables? Now, Darren gave a how to use a variable. He used the global variable because it was just the simplest thing. But Darren, is there any adverse effects to just using globals?
Yeah. And as you would say with your phrasing, you learn from the burn. And I should have known this. There's 2 different ways of creating variables in Power Apps, or 2 main ways. I mean, there are a few others, like using a with block and collection variables, but so there's also what's called a context variable. And a context variable is a variable that has a scope of just one screen. And a global has the scope that's global. It's all the way throughout the application. So what I found out when I used globals all the time is I would have all these bugs. Sometimes I would misspell a global variable, and I'd be creating a second global variable. And then whenever I need, let's say I've got a variable that's got a customer in it, a customer record, And then, like, I don't know, 2 weeks down the road, I'm working on the same application. It's like, oh, I'm on the screen. Oh, I need to put this customer object into a global. And then I create another global variable called maybe GBL cust. And so I've got all these variables all over the place. And at some point it changes it here, but doesn't change it here.
Right.
And also, I was taught that, global variables are created on the stack early on.
Yeah.
So if you do if you know about the stack and the heap or how memory is used, the computer has to go through the stack to go find a global at the bottom, has to take things off the stack to find the value of that global there, right?
Right.
Whereas,
now, hold on. So that means, like, imagine, I just wanted to understand that. Imagine if you had a stack of 100 pieces of paper and you had the global and it's first in, last out. So the first thing you did was a global variable. It's at the bottom. And you got to go through each piece of paper saying, is this the one? Nope. Is this the one? Nope. Is this the one? Nope. Is this the one? You got to do that every time you try to access that variable. Sorry, Darren, to interrupt, but I just felt that was.
So do you want to talk about how, in contrast, a local variable is handled with the stack and the heap?
I mean, we could if you wanted to. I just wanted to just say that, it slows it way down. When Darren says it slows it down, it really slows it down a lot, is what I was trying to say. Now Matt over here in the private chat asked, is this a Canvas app or a Dataverse app? How is the easiest way to tell the differences?
Okay. So Dataverse is a data source. Okay. So another data source you could use is SharePoint. Another data source you could use is SQL Server. So it's not a question of, is it as a Dataverse app or is it a SharePoint app or whatever. What you might be, because we discussed this yesterday, the difference between model driven and a Canvas. So I don't know if you said, is this a Canvas app or a Dataverse app? Perhaps what you meant to ask is how do you know the difference between a Canvas app and a model driven? And so what you'll notice whenever you create a new app, okay, here in Power Apps, I'll go ahead and bring up the screen here. And if you click on this little plus sign and you want to create a blank app, look at this. We are presented with 3 choices. We've got a Canvas app. We've got a Dataverse. Well, it's a model driven. Now, model driven, you have to use Dataverse as a data source. Same thing with a Power Page website. And the reason why a Power Page type of project is listed here, because this used to be called Power Apps Portals, okay? And it uses Dataverse as well. So if you had chosen this model driven, it would have created a model driven app for us. And we don't have quite a bit as control over the app as we do with Canvas app. So most, if not all, what we talk about here on this channel is Canvas Power Apps. So great question. Thank you for asking that. So we're talking about variables here. So we've got this global variable, and you see I set it to Darren on the other screen, and it still has that value. Okay. Now, if I go back and find that button, and I'm going to copy it. So I'll say this sets a global, and this button will set a local variable. Okay. Now there are completely different functions that you use, whether you're working with a global or a local. Okay. Instead of using set, what you would say is you would prefix it with LOC name. Okay. LOC name. And I'm going to set that to Darren. Okay. I'm going to say local there. So sort of differentiate this. Darren as a global. Okay. and we've got this text box that shows the GBL name. I'm going to copy and paste that text box here, and I'm going to say LOC name, and it's blank. It doesn't have anything in it because I need to hold down my Alt key on my keyboard, click on the set local, and now it says set local. If I click on set global, it says Darren global. Now, what happens if we were to copy these 4 things and we go over here and we paste them here? Now, you notice right here at the top, it actually says Darren global. So if I were to say Darren global 2 and set local 2 there, I'll execute that code. Now it says Darren global 2, as it does here. And if I use this local, I'm going to say set local, and it's going to say Darren local 2. So what you're going to see here is if I go back, maybe I should say 3 on this screen. Okay. So there's 3 and there's 3. And if we go back to screen 3, oh my goodness, Kurt, what just happened here? I use set.
There you go.
That's what happens when you leave for 30 seconds.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, when you were giving, I just want to say real quick, you were giving examples of when you've had problems with globals. What my favorite thing is to do is I'll have a global variable and I'll be on another screen and I'll set it to a different value and forget I set it on that to a different value. And then I can't understand how come I'm on the first screen and it's not showing the value that it's supposed to show, so I set a value on the first screen, go to the third screen and I set the value again. And then I go back over here and I'm working on the first screen and it's like, well, it's supposed to be the value on this first screen. Nope, because you set it over here on the third screen if you bounced over there. So it's really, there's a lot to keep track of. If you're bouncing around different screens and you're programming, you're setting the values and you forget to set something, it's really hard to track that down,
Yeah, it makes your application more complex. And I can handle complex things. Well, your application gets complex and more complex as time goes on. You want to keep things as simple as possible so that you can scale things when things get really hairy and complex and sort of nasty, So in order to create a local variable, you cannot use set. You have to use update context.
Yep.
Okay. So I did that properly now. Now I'm going to say 5 for both of these because we're on screen 5. I'm going to go back to screen 3. Look at this. Darren global. I'm going to make this 3 since we're on screen 3. And this local is going to say Darren local 3. So there's 3. And now this is set to 3. Okay. And then if we go back to 5, that 3 was changed globally, but it still retained the value that we set here on screen 5.
Yeah.
So it's like you got a different, even though we named it the same thing on the 2 screens, because they're locals, the scope is to those individual screens.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the functions that you're using to define these variables and, to initialize them or set values. So remember, we talked about everything's in a formula and everything's a function in Power Apps. You have an update context. Now, update context is another way of saying local variable. You're updating the context, the screen. So this variable is going to have the context of this screen, and that's the only one it's going to be. And whenever you want to change the value, you're going to update that context. Okay, that's how I remember to use that variable name. And so update context is going to be for the screen, and set function is going to be for your globals. And really, if you want to use good programming, people say that you want to learn how to do it right. Good programming practices says you only use globals when you cannot use locals. Use update context everywhere unless you just absolutely cannot find a way around it. And you know what? In Power Apps, I can almost always find a way around not using a global. Generally, I might have 1 global variable in an app, generally. And I might have 150 local variables.
Yeah, and if you want to see your use of variables, you go over here to the sidebar, and they now have a thing called variables, and you can see all of your variables here. You see that I've got one GBL name, and it shows me the value. Here's my context variables.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, Darren, I missed it maybe, but did you show them how to navigate and bring another variable over to another screen so you can pass a variable kind of like a parameter to another screen? Did you show them how to do that?
We could. I was wanting to stick just to the basics,
Okay.
and going over things. I mean, we talk a lot about that with as we build apps. So yeah, so I would like to confirm what you just said. You can actually pass parameters as local variables whenever you do navigate. So I'll show just a quick example here. This button says navigate. Okay. And we can, so there's other parameters, optional parameters that you can have in navigate. So we've got a screen transition, and Kurt's favorite screen transition is cover right.
Exactly.
So we'll pick that.
Exit stays right.
And then the third parameter we're going to put in curly braces. And this almost looks like the curly braces that you would use inside of an update context, right?
Yep. Yep.
So you can actually pass a value in as a local variable into that next screen. So we could say LOC time navigated.
Now that's going to be the variable that you see on the other screen now, right? You're going to use that word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if I run this, go ahead.
It could be different than the name of the variable that you have on your screen, but it's going to have the same value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm going to click on this button, and I could have another label here. And in this label, I could say LOC time navigated. So that screen will automatically know, because some other screen in the application is trying at some point does pass in a parameter, so we can actually get at that value now. Yeah. So whenever Kurt and I say we really don't use globals very much, and you might say, well, how do you access something that was on a different screen? Well, when you navigate to it, you pass all those values over that it needs.
Yep. And since it's in a curly brackets, what you're going to see those curly brackets, whenever you see something delineated with that means it's probably a record. It's going to be in the form of a record. So the update context variable, the function, is actually within that curly brackets. That's a record, which means you can do more than one variable in that one function, in that function. So you can pass a whole list of variables over to your screen, to another screen if you needed to, and treat them sort of like parameters. Now, Francisco up there in the comments asked, is collection always global? If one collection is made on start, will it be possible to reference it anywhere on the app? And fortunately and unfortunately, collections are global, as all data sources are. Collections are treated very similar to persistent data. If you bring in a data source, a data table into your app, it's assuming that you're going to use that across all screens. Your app is going to be using that for everywhere. So it assumes global. Same thing with collections. Collections are global as well. You got to be careful, because collections, just like global variables, you can call something different and get mixed up on what you were calling it. So,
yeah. Something else I'd like to respond to from the comments. Please let us know when you're going to be live next. Guys, we go live every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Almost without fail.
Right. And we have live workshops every Friday.
Every Friday. Yeah.
So we have live workshops. And if you're wanting to get into some other live stuff with us, give us a call. Maybe we could talk about that too. If you've got a bunch of people trying to do something, you said you'll let your friends know. Maybe there's something else we can do too.
Yeah. So we have a community. There's the links at the top of the screen where the workshops are discussed, and you can reach out to us there, or just send us an email. Actually, the email's up there at the top as well. Support@Nesys. That will go to both me and Kurt. Yeah. So very good.
I'll tell you what, we are really taking the mystery out of beginning level programming in Power Apps, right? I mean, we are really, I mean, Rick, how do you feel? You feel like you're starting to, has this been kind of helping you understand Power Apps a little bit? Now, Rick does it. He's not a programmer per se, like Darren and I are. So what do you think, Rick?
Yeah, man, it's been really cool because, I mean, when you said in your topic, you're covering the basics for Power Apps basics made easy. You guys are doing it, just going down, telling what each thing is and what they can do for you. So it gives it gives somebody who is maybe possibly considering, building an app, just what they got ahead of them. And getting the mystery out of it, that you guys are doing a great job, man. I appreciate it.
That's good. And then Matt on the other side of that. Now, Matt, he's got some tech and some programming background, but you're new to Power Apps, I think, right, Matt? And so he's over here in the private chat. And you've been able to pick things up pretty good, you think, so far? You're starting to get this? And he says starting to get it. Yes. And I just want to suggest to everybody to practice it. You learn programming by doing it. So take these examples that Darren's throwing up here on the screen because he goes really fast. I always call him an F-16 fighter pilot, but the guy can go. And so take this video when we're all done with it and practice it. See if you can emulate what was done on the screen. And that's how you're going to learn how to operate with this.
So there is another question. Can you use local variables and components? The answer is no. Because a local variable, by definition, it has to be part of a screen. And inside of a component, you don't really have a screen yet, until you drop it on a screen. So I got this LOC test in a component, and you can see here it's not recognized. Is a recognized but not supported function in this context of a component? So the answer to that would be no. You can use globals, and there is this setting that you can use that Kurt and I don't recommend, which is access app scope. It would allow this component to access all the globals from the hosting application. We don't recommend that. We recommend that you use properties that would be passed in. Because with object-oriented programming, there's a concept called encapsulation, and you sort of violate that concept by opening that up. So I just thought I'd mention that. Very good. Yeah, this is some good stuff, guys. I'm going to go back to that last screen, screen 5 here. So we do have a list of things here, okay? And if we want to loop through something, we could do so with a for all function. Okay, so let's add a new button to this screen. And so here in this button, we'll create a for all. And now we need either an array or a collection of rows to sort of go through. Okay. And what we could end up doing is taking these values and adding them to a data source. I had a question the other day, which is, hey, show me how you can patch 2 different data sources in a gallery. Well, this is something that you could very well do inside of a loop, is you could patch 3 or a dozen different data sources. Okay. So we've got a gallery here called gallery 1. And for each record or each row we have in gallery 1, we can loop through those. And how you get at the underlying collection of a gallery is you say all items. Okay, then I'll use a comma. And then the second parameter for the for all is the code that you want to execute for every single item in there. So what we might want to do is I say we update this, and we could update data with a function called patch. And what we want to do here is update these items. So what I'm going to do is the data source will be this collection. So I'm going to copy copy this value here, all those items. And the individual value, this is going to be my record. I'm sorry, this record. Okay. So if you're using a loop and you want to get at the individual item, you can use the keyword this record to access that. And then the third parameter for patch is the name value pairs. Okay. So if we have an item here called, let's go over here and look at the values for this data source. And you can see that we have sample heading. And we could actually update that in a loop. Okay. Sample heading. And what we could say here is this record dot sample heading, but we could just append something here like the current date and time stamp. Okay, we could do that. And we need to use ampersands to put strings together. So we could use now here. Now it's got a problem with this all items. And I don't think it likes the fact that I'm using the items here in this gallery. Now there is something that we can do to get around this so we're not depending upon the gallery to loop through it. What we could do is when this screen loads up, this screen 5, let's go see if we have any properties that start with the prefix on. And we do. We have an on hidden and an on visible. Okay, so we'll go to on visible. And someone was just asking about collections, if they are global or not. And what you'll see here in the on visible, we can create a collection. So I'm going to say clear collect, which is how you create a collection inside of Power Apps. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this collection. I'm going to say sample data. And all the data that I want to put in there is, it needs to be a table value. So in this case, we got that sample table, and we're going to put it into this collection name, call sample data. So if I go off the screen and I go back, if I go look at this collection here, it's a table. I can open it up and it's exactly the same as what we had in there before. Okay. So I could use this collection variable, this up, and base this gallery on that data, that collection. And you can see it's the same thing here. Okay. And then when we do our loop, instead of going through all the gallery and those items, what we could do is we could go through and we could actually patch that collection that the gallery is based on. Okay. And I'm hoping that this will work as a good example here. So yeah, what you notice is that this label here that was holding the sample heading has actually been updated with the date timestamp there. So what did we just do there? We iterated through a list. We performed a loop. Okay. We performed a loop. Now we had a question a few moments ago, which is, hey, are collections globals? Well, look at what we have here on the side of the screen. Okay. There's our dad jokes. And as Kurt said, hey, it's considered a data source. And all data sources are globals. So here we go. There's our call sample data.
Now there's something I'd like to go backwards on. You were talking about you're putting together two string values, and you said I have to use the ampersand sign to do that. Now, what is that all about, Darren? What's the okay? So usually, if I'm thinking about adding two strings together, I say string 1 plus string 2. Can't do that though here.
Yeah, you can do that in some languages. Let me see if that actually does that actually work in Power Apps.
I don't think so. But I wanted us to talk about that a little bit. Why is that? What's going on there?
Yeah. It's actually true. In some languages, you can actually put strings together. I think C#, C, C++, JavaScript, they use plus signs even for strings, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But Visual Basic and Power Apps, the Power FX language, if you want to splice together, put two strings together, you don't use plus, you actually use the ampersand instead. Now, if you're working with numeric values and you actually want to do some arithmetic addition, then you'd use the plus sign.
Yeah. Yeah. In more traditional languages, you have that thing called operator overloading, where you can actually, they have the plus sign overloaded so they can handle math, numbers, or splice letters together. In some languages, you can do both. Like in DBase, you could do both. But an ampersand is usually, it's always been the way to splice strings together. But you have to do it in Power Apps. You have to use the ampersand. Just wonder if you're beginning to this thing, you're trying to understand what's that ampersand all about. It's just an operator like a plus sign, but it's used to put string literals together. So if you wanted to say first name plus last name, those aren't numbers, those are letters. So you have to use the ampersand.
Yeah. There's actually another way, and I prefer this way over the second way. You could use a function called concatenate.
Yeah.
And you could give it comma separated values as you're passing those values into the function concatenate, and it will concatenate and return that value as a single string. So you could do that. So bread and cheese, in all items, will it ignore those records not in the view of the gallery due to filter or due to another gallery.selected items? The selected won't narrow down the value. Like if you're basing a loop on all items, it's pretty much all the items that are represented in that data source that the gallery is based on. So yeah, if here within the gallery we were to do a filter, so if I said filter and I filtered it down somehow, then we wouldn't have it. So if you want to filter everything out, you could just put the word false in there, and it's not going to allow any items. It's going to filter all of them out. Then we wouldn't have any items to loop through. So yeah, it does exclude those. And Mike Gillett says, I'm using email addresses in app OnStart to define user groups. Can for all be used to reference a column of email addresses to create a user group? I don't see why not. Now, Kurt, what are the restrictions? Are there any frustrating restrictions in the how you do loops in Power Apps with for all that you found?
I don't know how to answer that. I guess the for all, I mean, it works with sequence, so it works like for next loops and all that. So I'm not sure how to answer that.
Yeah. So can you use variables inside of a loop?
Okay. Now we're on that. Okay. So, you can't use update context or set, but you can use a collect, and you can use a with. So,
Okay.
so we have that.
Yeah.
Right. So yes and no.
And as developers, it's like, if you're inside of a loop, yeah, I want to update variables. I want to do all kinds of stuff. And it will not allow you to update variables, globals, locals. But collections is a different matter. Now, something that it doesn't like is if you're traversing or enumerating or iterating through something like this. If I had used this column, this collection name up here, it doesn't like you to modify it down here inside the loop if you're using it up here to control the loop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like these weird little rules that you'll come across, So, and Mike is referencing the column of email addresses in the SharePoint list. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to do that. You're defining user groups like app admins. Yeah, you could use a for all. Now, I don't know what exactly you want to do in that for all. perhaps you're wanting to add them to a collection of app admins. But then what is that based on? Is it based on criteria? Like, is there a column in the SharePoint list that says is admin? In that case, you wouldn't have to loop. You could just do a clear collect and filter that SharePoint list as you're building that collection. And that would be like an easier or more straightforward way of doing that. Yeah. Okay. So now we do have some measles. We always like to fix our measles here. So we got sample heading, and now it doesn't have the error anymore. So I think it was just confused. Sometimes Power Apps does get confused. Let me move off this screen and then come back. There we go. Because that collection is built in the screen on visible. Okay. So let's talk about some other topics that would be considered basics. Oh, well, here's a good question. Bread and cheese. Is there a do until loop in Power Apps? Kurt, what you got for us, man? Is that available in Power Apps?
I mean, not in its traditional sense. No, there's not. And so now we got to talk about iteration. We got to talk about what is this do until, what is that? So in iteration, we talked about iteration. You have to know how to do iteration. There's 3 forms of iteration, and there's rules in when to use each one of those forms. You have the for next loop, you have the do while loop, and then you have the do loop until or do until loop, right? Mm-hmm. And so the for next loop, you use it when you know the exact number of times you need to use the loop, and you know that you need the loop. The do while you use when you're not sure you need to use the loop, but you don't know the number of times you've got to do it. And then the do until is, you need to use the loop one time, but you don't know how many times after that. So in Power Apps, we try to handle that. Now the for all loop itself is kind of like a do loop until, right? Because you're going to go and you're going to loop through all the records in a table. That's what it's designed for. It's designed to be working with a data source. So it's really this, because you're going to access that table one time if you got one record in it. And if it's empty, then you're not even want to go into that loop. You'd put that into a condition. But then you actually in the for all, you actually have this thing called a sequence function that Darren kind of showed me. And that actually lets you emulate the for all loop. So we can handle the for all loop can be handled to do the for next. It can be modified to do a for next loop and the do loop until, but it doesn't do the do while very well. You actually have to do some kind of conditional branching around it.
Yeah. So Kurt and I, we talked about this extensively, the different types of loops that you might be familiar with on other platforms and how to achieve it, or what is available, what's not available in Power Apps. Something that I feel like we should talk about is we do have a timer control that you could sort of use as a way to loop through things. So you can, I just brought over a timer control. Now the duration you see up here is 60,000. Now these are milliseconds. So this is going to be 60 seconds. So let's say we want to loop through something. Okay. I might set this to be just 100 milliseconds or less. Okay. Now a timer control, let's look for properties that start with the prefix on select, on timer end, on timer start. Okay. So what I like to do is put code in on timer end that I want to have executed every iteration through. Okay, so you could put code there that will be executed over and over again. Now you do have properties over here like repeat. So it's going to start the timer when this thing loads up. We've got auto start. So if we have that set to true, it's going to automatically start that timer when the screen loads up. The auto pause makes it pause the iteration or the timer going and going. If you turn that off after it goes through, and that auto pauses. If you go to a different screen, it will pause running that, because a lot of times you go to a different screen, you don't want it to continue to run. So that's where the pausing would be happening if you set this to be true. Okay. And then you've got this repeat. So if you actually want a true loop, you might want to not only turn this on initially, but actually put your expression here. Okay. So for a do until, well, what you want to do is set up your expression do until something happens, a Boolean value, true or false. Put that expression here, and you effectively have a do until loop, or reverse it, and it would be a do while loop. Okay. And then, Kurt, you're going to love this question. What about breaking the loop? Is that possible? Is there anything that you'd like to say about, so we don't, there's no break keyword, right? But do you use break a lot in other languages where you do have that available, Kurt?
I don't. And I actually teach not to do that. I know that that's turned into a programming practice in the last 20 years or so, but it's, in my opinion, it is a terrible programming practice. It means you don't have control of your program, and there's got to be another way. There has to be another way for you to be able to get out of your loop. In other words, you follow the rules of those loops. When do you use which type of loop? You follow those rules, and you control your data set accordingly. In other words, you have to have control of your program. And if you're breaking, you're not controlling your program. That's,
ooh, you got here. Never use break.
Yep. Yeah. I've never used break because of that reason. I've been taught to have control of your program at all times. And
well, something that you told me early on is, Darren, your loops, your blocks of code, your procedures should always have one entry point and one exit point.
Exactly.
Once you told me that, it completely changed the way I saw my whole philosophy of programming. Yep. So if that's not true, you've got a lot of times one entry point at the top, right? And then you've got a loop here, and it's got a break. And over here, you've got a break. And then over here, you've got a return. And over here, you've got a return. You've got all kinds of different exit points from your loop, from your block of code, from your procedure. Yeah. And if you want something to always execute before breaking out of the loop or breaking out of the procedure or the function, you put it at the bottom, right? But if you've got several exit points, I don't know, it almost feels like spaghetti code based on how you trained me early on, Kurt.
It is.
And if you take a look at the private chat, yeah, Matt was asking no break, and he's asking why.
And you know, it's funny because that it's if you talk to people who have learned how to program in the last 20 years, they're going to all say, well, we use break. Use break for everything. I don't know when that started, but there's programming, still programming. It's the same today as it was before. You know, I want to illustrate that by using something called the switch statement. You know, we have a switch or a do case. You know, remember you have the case where you have like multiple types of values that a variable can have. Okay. And at the end of every one of those cases, you have either what they call it, some languages, they call it otherwise. In some languages, they call it else. You have an else part of that. And when I was teaching, Darren, you remember this, if you use that else or that otherwise in a switch or in a do case, there was big points off. In fact, you probably flunked your lab if you did that, because I taught that you would surround that case statement with an if condition. And you test to see if your variable holds any of these potential values. And if they don't hold any of these potential values, then you don't go into that. And there's two reasons why you do that. Well, three, because number one is you're not in control of your code. But number two is if you're working for General Motors or something, you got 5 million records you got to process. You don't want to go down those things if you don't have it, if those values aren't right. You don't go down wasted times. That's wasted machine instructions, you know? And the third reason is just what you said: one entry point, one exit point. That's it.
So I'm trying to come up with a good example for switch since we've mentioned it, and it is another way to do conditional branching.
Yeah.
So if you've got a value that needs to be evaluated, and if it's 1, you do this. If it's 2, do this. If it's 3, this. And you might have 50 different options. Hopefully you don't, but you might have a handful of options. And there people are used to using break as well. right?
Well, think about letter grades, right? Like if you were going to give a letter grade to somebody, to students or something, you would have, it's either going to be A, B, or C, or D, or E. But if somebody puts puts a number of letter J, you don't want to go down there. You know, you don't want to have this otherwise thing in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So I've got a test out here on my screen where people can click on something. Okay, we've got radio buttons. Inside this label control, we could do a switch if it allows me to type there. We have a switch. Okay, the first thing that you want to put inside the switch, the first parameter is going to be, hey, what are we looking at? What are we considering? Well, we're considering the value, not visible, the value or the selected, let's say selected text dot value. Okay, so that's going to give us either the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or the gibberish at the end. Okay, that's what we're going to look at. And when I do a switch, it's like, hey, if it's 1, then you get an A. And I typically will line these things up like this. If it's a 2, then you get a B, so on and so forth, right? And Kurt, I don't know, did you touch on this a few seconds ago? What you like to do for switch statements is actually have a if statement before the switch to make sure if it's even valid to go in a switch statement.
Yeah.
Because you don't want a bunch of items being checked over and over again. You know, if you have something as an else, well, why not put that at the top with an if statement? So you at least exclude all those things that were always going to that else at the bottom.
That is your else. That is your else, is get out of there. Don't even go in there, because you got to look at every one of those values, right? To see if it matches that.
Yeah.
And you know, Matt in the private chat was talking about the break, and you know, talking about, and he's understanding the okay wasting time. He could identify with that. But you know, for me, it goes at a deeper level than that. It's about, you know, answering the question. I want to learn how to program the right way. I want to learn fundamentals the right way. And it all comes down, like I told Darren a long time ago, everything needs to have one way in and one way out. You know, that's fundamentally sound programming right there. And if we could stick with those fundamentals like that, and you learn how to do it the right way, it's about that, because everything else is going to take care of itself. Now, the number one reason why that's the right way is because of wasting time. You know, we don't want to waste machine instruction time. When I was learning how to program, memory was very, very hard to come by. And processing speed was like, I could out type it. You know, I could out type a processor, especially if it was going over the phone lines. You know, the 300 baud speed, I think, is what the modems were. So we had to do a lot with little memory. And so you have to make sure you learn how to make sure that your programs were strong and concise. You didn't have wasted time going in and out of that stuff. Nowadays, we have these programs that you know, we got memory's cheap, you got millions and millions, but we have these programs now that are turning into pigs. They're just consuming large amounts of memory and large amounts of processor speed. We are asking our computers to do more and more. As we learn, as we get more memory, we're asking our computers to do more. So I want to challenge everybody to say, look, stick with the fundamentals that we learned. Assume that memory is hard to come by, and practice those fundamentals in that, with that mind frame, and your programs are going to be so much faster and so much slicker and cleaner than everybody else's. You know, it's going to make you the better programmer. It's going to make you beyond the average bear. And so yeah, we don't want to waste time, but we also want to do it the best we can do it, right?
Bread and Cheese says this is why the channel is the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Matt says that makes a lot of sense. I want to be better than the average bear.
And that's another, that's a whole nother thing for you guys that don't know what that is. That's a big deal for me and Darren, right? The bottom line rule is, you know, they always talk about how programming and the programming field is everybody wants to be a programmer. Everybody wants to be a developer. It's a flooded market. You can't hardly find a job these days. No,
Really?
No. here's the thing. There are so many average programmers out there and so many junk programmers out there that don't know how to program their way out of a paper bag. And they might even have some pretty big letters behind their names, you know? But the thing of it is, you can stick me, I have that confidence because of my fundamentals that you can stick me in a room of programmers, 100 programmers, and I'm going to be better than 50 of them. And as long as I'm better than 50 of them, I'm going to have a job. And that's what I want you guys to have. They're watching this thing today. I want you guys to have that confidence that says, I can go into a room of anybody and know that I'm better. If you give me a room of 100 people in whatever I'm doing in life, I'm going to be better than 50 of them. And as long as I'm better than 50 of them, I'm going to be okay. So the rule is, don't be the average bear. Be better than the average bear. So yeah. Matt said a whole lot when he said that. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. So I want to sort of go back to the switch statement. So if you looked at what I was typing up here in the switch statement for this label, is we looked over at the radio button control, and whatever is in the value, if it's 1, they get an A. If it's 2, they get a B, so on and so forth. And then the else block, the last parameter in a switch is going to be, hey, if it doesn't fall into any of those, go here, you know? So if we look and run this, notice that none of these items are selected and it still says NA. We didn't even get to the 6th item here yet, and it's already showing us NA. So in an application where, let's say most of the time it's always going to that else block, you know, Kurt always told me it's better to have an if statement wrapped around your switch to check for that else at the get-go, you know, because anything that you put in a loop, or in our case, a gallery or something that's repeated over and over again, is really going to affect your scalability. It's either going to make your application really sluggish, or going to make it really fast. Anything inside of a loop, you should pay close attention to make sure things are the most efficient. Because even the smallest millisecond, you multiply that by 1 million records in a database. Well, now you've got a million little bitty wasted points of time that add up to hours. You know, I worked with this company. They hired this big consulting firm to come in and write this application, and they did it as a model-driven application that generated a report, and the report would take hours to generate.
You guys, I hope Darren just gave you guys huge gold here. Huge gold. I hope you guys were listening. People pay big money for this. He knew where I was going. He knew because people pay big money for this. That right there is huge right there. I mean, if you guys don't understand what he just said, hit rewind and do not proceed until you understand that. Don't even try to go down this road any farther until you learn that and understand that, what he just said. Really good stuff, man.
Yeah. Because if it just happens once, you might not think it's that big of a deal. But at some point, it's going to become a big deal. And then there's going to be a group of people looking at your application. Why is it so slow? And that might be their first impression of you, might be their first impression of Power Apps. You know, so those are big deals.
Big deals.
So I'm going to click on these different values. Oh, look, it's changing this label over here. And then we get to the last one that says NA. So here you see another conditional branching construct we can use instead of just the if then else.
So how would you could you show them how to wrap that up into an if so that NA was not there? Take a look. Show them how it should be done right.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go in here, and the main reason why it's not going to fit into this. Okay. I'm going to indent this over because I was taught to always indent my code to make it readable. Okay. We're going to look at this, but we're going to check for a few things. Okay. Number one, I want to know if it's numeric, because if they don't select anything or they select the last item, well, what the big deal is it's not numeric. So we're going to say if this is, well, first of all, I'm going to put a space here, because if I hit tab and IntelliSense, it's going to wipe all that out. So I'm going to say is numeric. Okay. If it's numeric, then this is fine going through this switch. That might take a long time. I'm going to put a comma here. If it's not numeric, then I don't want to do anything. So I wouldn't even include an else block, perhaps. All right. But we might want to check for other things like this value here. Is it, we want to say and. Okay. If the value is greater than 0, and it's got a problem with this because the value, the selected text, as you can imagine, is a text value. So we're going to have to typecast. We're going to change the type by casting it into a numeric value. And you do that by using the value function. Okay. So we make sure that's a number. And once it's a number, is it greater than 0? And we only check all the way up to 5. Okay. We want to make sure this is less than 6. So it's greater than 0, less than 6. Then we know we're within operating parameters here.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's probably how I would write that. Now, Kurt, as somebody who's taught me how to do this, is this how you would have done it?
Yeah. Except you wouldn't need the NA in there anymore. And you could actually put the NA apart from, you wouldn't have an else block in there. And you would have that else block on the other side of that if.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So we would actually put in here N, capital N-A. Okay.
Yep, you don't even go into the switch because you got to understand the deep dark recesses of your computer. You've got about 5 machine language instructions going for each one of those checks. It's got to check 1. That's 5 instructions. 2, that's 10. 3, 15. 4, 20. 5, 25. And then you had the if above that, the switch above that, that's 5. So that's 25, 30, that's 30 machine instructions. That's not bad. It can do that in less than a blink of an eye, unless you're doing 5 million records. Now you've got 30 times 5 million machine instructions going across just for this statement right here. So you see what I'm saying? And when I say machine instructions, I'm saying it has to go out to the register to get the memory, and it has to find that memory, and it has to know where that register is at. So that's a machine instruction. Then it has to move that into a block so it can process it into your core. Then it has to take another one. That's 1. Okay. So then you got the other side of that where it's taking the value. So you got 1. Is it a 1? Here's my variable. Is it a 1? So that's 5 language. That's 5 machine instructions at the assembler level that's happening in the deep dark recesses of your computer, just to be able to determine whether or not it was an A or not. Oh, now we got to go through that whole process again to determine it's a B. And then we got to do it again. So at the deep dark recess level of your computer, it's really important to think about how that computer is processing that memory, man. You know?
Yeah, guys, this is what happens when you are forever changed by coding in assembler.
Well, and, you know, I mean, I was blessed enough to be able to have to learn how to program before Windows. I mean, underneath Windows is about 4 or 5 levels of stuff that's being processed. And now we're in Power Apps, it's even worse because we have gateways, you have browsers, your browser has memories, your browser is running through an interpreter, you know, to be able to convert all that information across. And then you got to go across gateways to get into it. So there's so much happening behind the scenes, you know, it's doing a lot. And that's why I say we're asking our computers that are so fast to do so much more now, right?
Yes, and Matt said in the private chat, this is something that I wasn't taught about, how you code and the relationship to memory. And we actually have an accelerator student who was in the accelerator for a few months, and then he signed up for a computer science program at his local college or university, and he's just sort of sitting back and like, yeah, I already know all this. Isn't that funny?
Yeah. And it's amazing, isn't it? And here's the thing I want you guys to know too. Darren's a perfect example of this. He came into programming 25 years ago. Now, he learned as a Windows programmer. Now, he did do some COBOL stuff too, but he was a Windows programmer from the beginning. But think about his. Here he is now, what has been 25 years later. He's got a YouTube channel that's really successful. He's programmed at many levels at the corporate level, he's worked for State Department type stuff, and he's done so many different other kinds of apps. He's in Power Apps now. He didn't learn in Power Apps 25 years ago, but everything he's learned is still the same. These fundamental concepts never changed, man. They didn't change back when I was learning in assembler. They're still the same. Here I am in Power Apps, still the same. So if you guys can learn these things right here, they are lifelong trades. It's kind of like being, you'll never be out of a job. You'll never not be able to understand what's going on underneath everything. It's just good stuff to know.
They say with the advent of AI here in a few years, we won't even have any coders. But you think about this. AI is based on what humans have done, written, and produced. Yep. So it's looking at the typical code that's out there. Perhaps it was written by average bears. And what is it going to give you? It's going to give you average bear code. So I think what you'll see a huge move of maybe there'll be less developers around. And now the average bears won't, the AI will be able to produce things that are better than the average bear. And if you hone in your skill, you're going to be able to produce things that AI just doesn't know how to do.
I never thought of that, Darren. You put that very well. I never thought about that. You're right. That's exactly what AI is. It's a big plagiarism machine, right? And I remember there's been so many times in recent days where accelerator students, they were trying to go their own way and they didn't know how to do something. So they tried to figure out how to handle this thing, and they went and asked ChatGPT some stuff. And boy, they got twisted up in a knot and so fast. And they called me on a Zoom call, and I had to go in there and help them and it was just a rat's nest because they were relying on this. And I remember solving it. It was done in like 3 lines of code. And these guys had pages and pages of code. And it was like 3 lines of code fixed it. And so that's such a good point. As long as you're programming better than the average bear, you're going to outprogram AI. Yeah, I do it all the time. Like, you showed me how we can comment our code using ChatGPT, and it does a pretty good job. But there's been some places in here where ChatGPT says, and it looks like you're computing standard deviation or something. I can't remember what it was I was doing. It looks like you're doing that here, but it's too complicated to comment. I said, oh.
Yeah, I've been a little disappointed. There's been a lot of things I've used AI for, but it comes to a level where it just sort of breaks down and doesn't really come through. And it's still a disappointment.
So you better know enough. You better know enough to be able to check ChatGPT, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that you brought up a few slides or a few screens ago, when you're like, if you're going to say that the basics, you really should understand collections. And I'd like to spend some time on collections here in this session. And the data source that we were working with yesterday was a database table called dad jokes. Okay. And you can create a collection of rows and columns from a data source. You can create collections all kinds of different ways. You can use a table function. You could hard code some values. You saw me create hard coded values in those radio buttons. Well, that was collection right there, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the records that we generated yesterday for dad jokes, and we'll put it into this collection. And then I'm going to take this collection and I'm going to make this gallery based on this collection. Okay, so we'll do that. And what we do know, if I click on this dad jokes, it's a table and there's no data in there because I haven't clicked on the button yet. So I'll click on the button and now we've got some dad jokes. Okay, so we've got the joke, which is the question. And let's put the answer. Well, these are like an ID. So I'm going to take that out. I don't really need that right now. And I'm going to size this up a little bit. Okay. So we have a collection here. So clear collect is a way that you can create a collection. Now, what we could have done is we could have just said collect. collect will create a collection as well. Okay. Now, what's the difference between collect and clear collect? A clear collect will clear out that collection. If there was anything in it, it's gonna dump out all the contents out and create it fresh. Okay. And a lot of times people like to use clear collect over collect because here inside of this collection, if I hit the button, it's just going to collect more and more. Okay. So we could put a label here that will look at that collection that we just created. And this is so funny because in the middle of the workshop, I was sort of showing off this function that we can use called count rows. Okay, and we're going to say call dad jokes. How many items do we have? We have 100 items in there. 100 items. Now, if I were to make this clear collect and I are to run this, oh, it's really got 50. And I click it again, it still has 50 because it clears it out. And there's only 50 jokes in the database.
That's a good thing to remember, Darren, real quick. That collect, it's just like a shark, right? A shark just doesn't even think. It just eats. It just eats. It just eats. Collect just kind of reminds me of a shark. It just dumps. It's just going to collect. It's just going to collect. It's not going to care. If you hit collect again, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to add stuff to it. So your data set is going to get really big, really fast if you don't manage that right.
Yeah. So we've got, I think I'm going to bring over a label here just so that we can look at all of the different functions and things that you should really know about collections. So we've got, I'm going to type it here. We've got collect, clear, collect. We also have clear. What else do we have for collections? I feel like there's at least another one, if I'm not mistaken. I want to, vertical line, put this at the top. Okay. So here I'm going to say for this button, I'm going to say clear collect. Okay. We could have another button that does just the clear. Okay. Now it only needs the collection name for the clear. Okay. Clear. And I'll make a copy of this one. And this button will actually do collect. So we can sort of see how this all works. This one will always get 50. If I clear it out, there's not going to be any data in the collection. As you see, it's cleared out. There's no records there. But I could do collect. It's going to give me the 50. But if I do it over and over again, it's just going to increase the duplicate data there. Okay. And the function count rows comes in handy when you want to know how many items are in a collection. Okay. Kurt, what are some of the other things that you feel like would be basics around collections?
So, talk about one of the problems that I have with collections oftentimes is when you're creating a collection and for the first time and you get the red squigglies going and it's like, when does it recognize it? And when is it done? When does it understand it? So let's say if you did a clear, let's say the first thing I want to do is I want to do a clear. I want to do a clear function.
Okay.
Did you talk about the clear? I know you did clear collect. Yeah, you did it right up there.
Yeah.
Okay, you got clear call jokes. Now, if you did that first before you made call jokes, it's going to have a problem, right?
It is.
So let's talk about that a little bit so that people can get, because I get frustrated with that sometimes.
Okay. We'll call this clear problem. So let's say,
what real quick, Matt just asked something before you go there. We got to clear up. So clear would eliminate all but the original 50. No, what clear is, he's got clear collect in there, and clear will clear everything out, wipes it out, clean slate, and then it collects again. So it's going to go out there and get that 50. So if you look at that clear collect, now clear is going to get rid of everything, but clear collect is going to get rid of everything and then do the collection that you asked for. Okay, there you go.
And then so yeah, understand the difference between those three. If we just do the collect, it's just going to keep adding to it.
And you're going to have a lot of repeats.
Yeah. But the clear collect clears it out and puts the data in there.
Yep.
Now to go to the point that you brought up, Kurt, look, we've got a nasty error. You cannot create a collection by using clear. You have to create that collection by either using a collect or a clear collect.
It's so frustrating. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll do a collect, call it COL, my new collection, and assign empty to it, and then do a clear of it. So that way I can go ahead and process without the red squiggly.
Yeah. So I run on the same thing. If I've got a variable, a label out here, and I want this to be based on a variable, and I know I'm going to call my variable LOC value or something like that. And it's like, what? There's no variable. Yeah, I'm about to create it. Just give me a second, and then maybe in a button, I would actually, let's say I click on the label. Look at that. I could say update context, do my parentheses and the curly braces here. LOC, what did I call the thing here? Loc value. So I could do it actually within the same control here and put a value of, let's say 5. Okay. Now that I have that, now we don't have an error. If I hold down Alt, click on it, now there's a value of 5 there. What are some other things, Kurt, that we should go over with collections? Because collections is a really big deal, right?
It's such a big deal there that I almost want to do an entire live stream on nothing but collections. I mean, I think I know that for Accelerator, I did about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 videos on it. And because maybe I know I did a lot. There's so much to it. So we can start off at the beginning levels of it, and then we can get into some advanced crazy pet tricks with it, Yeah,
you've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Oh my goodness, I did. Yeah.
11 lessons in the module about collection mastery.
Yeah.
And you dive deep into this topic, and you played around and did some things that from previous experience. Yeah. And I've always said there's no way to do joins in Power Apps, which is sort of true. Natively, you can't do joins, but you found a way of sort of doing doing joins with the collections. I think you started calling it like a 3-dimensional array or a 3-dimensional collection, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We have 3-dimensional arrays, and then we have joins. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that you did for the Accelerator students on that.
And I think it's really important for data shaping and all that to be able to understand that. So I guess I'm saying that this is so powerful. I use collections. We talked about this in our loops, in a for all loop. In a for all loop, you can't use variables. Oftentimes you're wanting to do some counting in there. Is this the first time through the loop, the second, the third, the fourth? Now the sequence function gives you that. But if you're not using a sequence function, if you're using a data set, you don't have a value being iterated. How many times have you gone through the loop? Sometimes you need to know, where am I at in this loop? And so I can't use a counter variable. In C, we learned how to use counter variables. Can't do that here. So, but you can in a collection. So I can use collections. I can assign one value in a collection and just treat it like a variable. Or I can have a 1-dimensional array and treat it like a pocket of memory. Or I can treat it like a matrix and have rows and columns. Or I can actually create 3-dimensional arrays and attach an entire table to one of those rows and columns. So there's so much we can do with these collections. They're so powerful. And it's all done in memory. Lickety split fast. It's not like you're going out to the data source. You're going into you're in memory. So it's really fast. I prefer to do most of my processing in collections. I'll pull my data sources, my persistent data into my collections, and I'll do all the processing with that. And then I'll take it out there and write out. That way it's not slowing my Power Apps down. We don't want our Power Apps to look like Power Apps, and we don't want our Power Apps to run like them either. We want them things to run like C++ programs, because you're guaranteed you're going to have some super sharp C++ programmers out there, some .NET programmers or whatever going out there saying, I can do that so much faster. But I want to say that if you write your code right in Power Apps, you can make it go just about as fast as anything else. And remember, guys, I always say this too. Your programs always wait. I don't care what computer you run this on or what programming language you program it in. All programs wait at the same speed. So if you're waiting for process, which is what we do most of the time, we wait at the same speed.
I like it.
So
Kurt, I want to do a little practical example that is very, I mean, when you're dealing with the basics, you're like, oh, yeah, I got a button, it's got a variable, and you click on it, it says hello world. Well, let's talk about a practical example here. So this application has a data source for dad jokes. Well, that could be anything within, business. It could be customers. It could be this. It could be a shopping cart, all kinds of different things. And a good use of collections. So we've got all of our dad jokes in a collection of jokes. But let's go over here and let's base the second gallery, and we're going to call this favorite jokes. And you notice we're going to use this new collection name that I'm going to use, and I've got an error because I haven't done a collect or clear collect with it. So what I propose is I put in a little icon over here inside this gallery, and whenever someone clicks on it, what I want to do is I want to do a collect. There's the, for my favorites, I'm going to use that variable name. And what I want to do is I want to add this item. This item is a keyword in Power Apps that represents the underlying record that we're on inside that gallery. Okay. So when we do a clear collect, we're doing a clear collect and we're bringing in the data from the database into this collection. Okay. Now, something else we should probably do is do a clear on this other collection, the favorite jokes. Okay, so this button sort of initializes things for us. You might put this code in the on visible for the screen. Okay, but if we run this, we click on the button. Okay, and if I were to click on this little plus sign, look at that. I like this. This is going to be my favorite joke, but I might find this, might really like this dad joke, and we could go through and we could add these to our favorites. Well, let's say the whole purpose of this screen is to show and identify the favorite ones. And after we add it over to the right side, we want to remove it from the collection on the left side. And this is great that we're using collections because let's say inside of this label here, we collect, but we could also do a remove from this collection. So we have call jokes, this item, okay, which is how you delete things in Power Apps. You use the remove function. And what's great is that because this is in a collection, we're not really deleting any data out of the database, okay? We're just making it easier for these guys to use the app and to identify their favorite jokes here, okay? And we could put a label over here that will count the new collections. Okay, call favorite jokes. And every time we click on one of these jokes, we increase the number of favorites and we decrease the number of jokes that they can click on. Okay, so this is a great use of collections, I believe. So this is a good example to sort of getting used to using the clear collect, collect, and also remove. Yeah. All right. So, as we're talking about the basics here, I feel like we should talk about really commonly used functions like filter, lookup. Okay. I would expect anybody who has said that they've mastered the basics to know these as well. So I'm going to duplicate this screen for a moment. And let's say this screen, I only want to display jokes out of the favorites that will filter this based on some type of criteria. And we do have a joke ID, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But let's say we only want to display jokes that have an ID that is even and not odd. So we only want to look at, and how would we grab this, Kurt? How would we get at the even number out of these joke IDs?
So we would want a modulus function, right?
Okay.
Because there's a modulus, there's a weight. So in other languages, the modulus is an operator, but of course, everything's a function here, right? And right, exact Betsy said the percent sign. And the percent sign modulus returns a remainder of a division, right? So you do the division, and then it returns the remainder of that division, not the quotient, right?
Okay.
So we test to see if it's divisible by 2.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, you not now wait a minute, Darren. Whoa. Go back. You just did something. How come you didn't say, because the remainder has to equal 0, right? So what the heck? So if modulus of that equals 0, now we could write that. Now that's one way to make that work. But will that work like that? It should.
Yeah.
Let's see if it runs.
And what we can do, so we got 45 total. So I'll put the total over here on the left. And I want to know how many items are in that gallery there. So I could say gallery 1_5 here. Okay, instead of looking at that, I could say the gallery.all items. And there is an all items count that we can get at. Is there a rule on which one of these to use, Kurt? All items or all items count?
Well, the all items count works, but you got to be careful because of the pagination, right? You got pagination. So it's only going to, it may not be an accurate representation until your gallery gets completely full. So in other words, if you went all the way to the bottom of your gallery and back up, then you could probably have an accurate count. But if you haven't done that, it may mess up if you've got thousands of records in there. At 45, you're probably okay.
Yeah.
I tend not to use, when I'm working with collections, I tend to just do the filter over, repeat the filter again, is not use the all items because it's just so fast. But it works both ways.
So we've got, looks like it's displaying all 45. Did I do that modulus right? Should I be checking for
if the modulus equals 2, modulus. So why don't we say, did you do the modulus right? Divide my joke ID divided by 2. So take out the equal 0. And we want a not there in front of that.
Before the modulus?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we get all 45 again.
We get all 45, huh?
Do we say greater than?
How come that's not working there? Say greater than. Take out that not, put greater than 0. I guess maybe try to figure out what's going on with that. Why is it processing like
that? I feel like we should display maybe what the that ID is. Let's make sure that we have that joke ID. Okay, here's something. This is interesting. I don't think that like if we took this off and before we had not here and it gave us everything, right? But look at this joke ID. There is no joke ID.
Joke. There's no joke. That's no joke. There, no joke.
So let's see.
What did we do with the joke ID? Did we get rid of them all?
No, they're right here, Kurt.
Is it a text?
It does do a text for
we need to do a value.
So here's the issue. Whenever you go get collection data And Power Apps doesn't, if it sees that you're not doing anything with the column, it tries to be all like really intelligent.
Yeah.
And it won't get that data. It's called lazy loading. And I don't really like how it does that, but I guess it would be more efficient. If we really didn't use it, then why go get it, right? But how does it know if I'm going to use it or not? There is a setting in here, and I think it might be under upcoming feature, and you type in the word explicit.
There you go.
Look at that. Optimizes load times and reduces memory consumption by only fetching columns used in your app.
Which we've proven that doesn't work.
So yeah, if you're wanting to use some data there and it's coming back with
yeah, and you know what? I've always got to turn that on. I just assumed that you had that on or off. I'm sorry, because I can't do it. When you're working with collections, you have to. It'll do that to you every time. I've been bit by that so much.
Yeah.
Yep. There you go.
Yeah. So we're looking at all of these are even. Okay. Now, did we?
That'll work.
So it's not. Okay.
What's that?
So what does this modulus give us when we say joke ID 2?
Okay,
it gives us a numeric value, right?
Yeah. If it's divisible, then it's going to be 0. Okay. And not is a mathematical negative. So in the rules of programming, if it's 0, it's going to be false. And if it's any other number, it's going to be true. So in here, this way we don't have to say if this is equal to greater than 1 or equal to 1 or whatever. We can just say not. If you say equal 0, it's going to do the same thing. You see that? But if you say not, that's a mathematical Boolean. 0 is always going to be false, and any other number is going to be true.
Now, did you guys pay attention to that? Because not everybody knows this. Okay. When you're working with Booleans, let's say you've got a numeric value and you're going to make that into a Boolean. If it's 0, 0 is considered false, and anything other than 0 is considered true.
Yeah. So
a lot of times Kurt writes really slick code. And a lot of times when he knows he's dealing with a numeric, he'll treat it like a Boolean. And a Boolean is what the filter function is expecting for that second parameter. And you look at Kurt's code and it's like, wow, why is he using a number there as a Boolean? Because he's reducing the amount of computations there, right, Kurt?
Yep, exactly right. It goes right back to the deep dark recesses of your computers and the assembler. In fact, Boolean, if you break it down, Boolean is mathematical because they even have to assign a value to it to be true or false. So if you look at I think in C, it's -1. -1 is the constant that they use for a Boolean. It could be a negative number. Any other number but 0 is going to be true. So -1, -51. Okay. So Boolean at the grassroots of it all, it is a mathematical function. You can use Boolean to the power to do your computations if you need to.
Now, just realize if you're dealing with a Boolean inside a Dataverse, how do you do a Boolean inside a Dataverse?
Oh,
it creates a choice field.
Yeah.
And it's got its own way of dealing with it. So that's I guess a topic for another session, right?
Right. In fact, you just taught me how to handle a yes/no choice, but I'm having a problem doing a choice that's got like other things besides yes and no. It's it's a struggle. That's just a pro tip, guys. Don't ever use choice in your Dataverse. Never use choice. SharePoint, no, don't use choice.
Yeah, I actually have a video. If you guys look at the videos on the channel, I've got a video out there that says never ever use choice. And I give all the explanations why and such. But if you go to a big boy database like SQL Server, guess what? There's no choice. There's no choice column. So, and if you try to create a Boolean, well, the data type in SQL Server, it's called bit, either a 0 or a 1, So, So guys, we've looked at the filter function here. So if somebody were to say, oh yeah, I've mastered the basics, I would expect you to know filter. What about something like sort? Now we can nest our functions. Okay, so there's the filter function. We could wrap this filter function with a sort, and the sort function takes two parameters. The first parameter is the data source, which is returned by the filter function. And then the second parameter is, hey, what field are you wanting to sort on? And in this case, maybe I want to filter by the joke ID. Okay, so we could put that in there. We could filter based on the date timestamp of the created if we wanted to. There's an optional third parameter for sort, which is, do you want it ascending or descending? Let's say descending. The ascending is default. Okay, so if you don't pass that in, it's going to sort it ascendingly. But here we see that we've got 40, 22, 20, 14, and all the way down. Okay, so we've got that. So guys, these are the basics, and I'm keeping an eye on the comments here. If there's any other basic type of things that you would expect to see or to sort of go over. So we got filter, we have sort. I guess one other thing that would be very important to know is, let's say we were to go in here, let's say see this text box, we could have this joke being displayed in the text box. Well, we could add in here a text box and use a text box instead, allowing the user to modify the value. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this item.joke that's behind that label. Okay, and I'm going to replace it with this text box. And we could put that in there. And we could allow someone to update this. Okay. But let's say we want to get at, so the data may have changed in this collection. Let's say based on this ID we have here, okay, maybe we want to actually show the answer from the database. Okay. A lookup allows us to go get a record, a single record. It's not going to get any more than one record using that lookup function. Okay, so let's say someone clicks on this label here. We want to go get the answer or the punchline to the joke. Okay, so for this label on the on select, we'll go get it. Okay, so we'll say lookup. Let's go out to the data source. We'll say dad jokes. Okay, so the first parameter is the data source. The second parameter is the criteria by which you want to go retrieve it. So we have an ID here. So we can say this item dot joke ID. Okay, and it will go get that record. Now, if you just give it two parameters, it's gonna go get just that record. Okay, now we got red squigglies here, which is an error because this is an on select. It's confused what it is I want to do with this lookup, with this record. Well, really all I'm not interested in the whole record. I'm just interested in a value in that record. What I want to know is what the punchline is. So do we have punchline? We do have a punchline. Okay, so now that's going to come back as a value, a string value. What do I want to do with that? Well, I don't want to display it in that really small label there. I want it to be displayed at the very top of the screen. So I'm going to teach and show you guys a new function here called notify. Okay. We'll notify, which is sort of like a little pop-up thing where we can display a bunch of text. Okay. And that criteria that we were looking for, this is going to give us that numeric value. That's the ID. We want to say, hey, go to that data source, the dad jokes. Look at the joke ID and match it up with the current record's ID. So now if I run this, I click on 40, it's going to give me the answer. Why don't skeletons fight each other? They don't have guts. Why don't scientists trust atoms? because they make up everything. Okay. So guys, you've been exposed to the filter function, the sort function, the lookup. You know how to deal with collections. You know how to deal with the basics of controls. Might I say, you now know the basics of Power Apps.
You guys are right. Let's go look. We had an outline that we were working off of. How far down that outline did we go?
Let's see here. Here we go. Let's make it a little bit bigger here. We'll go through here. Adding text boxes, labels, and buttons to a Canvas app. We've done that. Basic properties of controls. Boom, done that. Design a basic user interface. I feel like we've done that a few times.
Yeah.
Okay. Arranging controls on a screen. Yeah, we've arranged controls on a screen. Adding and linking multiple screens in a Canvas app. Now, what it's talking about here is linking controls. So we could have one control linked to, remember we had the sliders and the rectangle would change based on what was happening in another control. That's called linking the controls. So you guys have been exposed to and now know that. Understanding the formula bar. We went over that. Simple formulas for basic interactivity. Yes.
Yeah, we've done
Displaying
a lot of that.
lists. Absolutely. Basic customization of galleries. We've covered that. Connecting your app to data sources. We did that. We have the dad jokes database in there. It's been added to that project. Using controls to display a listing of data. Yeah, we've done that.
Yep.
Adding and using forms for data input. Well, we really focused on galleries and forms yesterday in the workshop. So we've covered that. And we've also covered that in some other basic level videos. Okay. Changing the app themes and colors. We've looked at that. Not only the classic themes, the ones that we've always been used to, but the modern ones as well. Customizing the look and feel of your app. So as long as you have a coherent thing to follow, like a style guide or a website, you want to set up the colors and the styles based on that. How to save, publish, and share. Okay, now that's something that we haven't covered, Kurt. So something we touched on very thoroughly yesterday is how to, you want to save early, save often, right? So you've got a little save button up here. You hit Control S to always save. Now there's a button over here called Publish. So if I click on Publish, you're taking the current version of what you see on the screen, that which you've saved, okay? And when you publish it, that means the users can now see the current version. So if I hit Publish, and I had shared this with you guys, you'd go in and try to use this app and you'd have the very latest version. But I could go in here, make tons of changes, and I'm saving, and haven't published. Well, the users aren't going to be able to see that until you hit that publish. Okay. How do we share this app? Well, there's another icon up here, share. If I click on that, it's going to take me to another screen. Okay. And I can type in here, well, I want to share this with my buddy Kurt. So I click on him. This guy looks intense. And I would just click on this share button. As you can see, that was here at the bottom.
That's not me.
That is when you work out. That's what you look like. If I click cancel, I just click on this area over here to the side. Here's some information about our app and the link. So you could share it with them. And like, hey, what's the link to your app again? Well, you go here and you click on this button and we'll copy it to the clipboard. Okay. Now look at this. We've got versions. How many versions? We got 45 versions of this app, Kurt. And Power Apps will save your app by default every 2 minutes. And we looked at this yesterday in the workshop as well. Where is it? Save changes every 2 minutes. But I always like to save manually because every time you hit Control S, you're creating a new version. It has this built-in version history. And a lot of times the undo doesn't work. So it's always nice to have these versions, these manual restore points, because I'm like, well, this all worked. I messed it up, but I know yesterday at the end of the day, it worked just fine. So yesterday was the 22nd. So if I go down here to the 22nd, at the end of the day, 22nd, version 15 was it. So I could click on the ellipsis, click on restore, and it would create a new version at the very top. It would be version 46. And then on any of these, what you could do is, you see where it says live, that means that it's been published. This is the version that users are going to see. So I just covered saving, publishing, sharing, all right there. Was there anything that I sort of didn't mention there, Kurt, that I probably should have mentioned? Anything that comes to mind, or did I do a thorough job there?
I think you did a pretty good job. I'm trying to think. I can't think of nothing. Nope.
Okay, so we've got that. So let's bring this back up.
Oh, in the share, you can own. Did you talk about owner and user, and whether or not somebody wants to be if they want to be able to see the source code or just be able to run the program? Did you talk about that at all?
I didn't, and perhaps we should there. So I'm going to go back into share. Okay, so you can see that I shared this with Kurt. Now, if you want somebody to be able to go in and edit the Power App, you could make this person a co-owner. And if somebody's not a co-owner, they're not going to be able to open up the app and edit it as a Power Apps developer. They can only use it as a user.
Just want to tell you guys, be careful who you're giving ownership to your apps.
And why is that?
Well, I mean, sometimes, they make mistakes without without trying, but also you want to make sure that, because what happens if Darren and we're both on this app, and let's say I was working on it last night and then I went to sleep, and then Darren gets up at 4 a.m. and start working on the app, and he can't get in the darn thing because it's in read only mode now because I've got access to it now. Or he says, okay, well, we can override that now because they've given you that ability. But now he wonders, well, how many changes did Kurt make? And are they going to be right or not? And
yeah, that's true. You got to collaborate with people more. It used to be, if I closed out of it, I made you a co-owner, and you're like, oh, I'm going to go in and see what Darren did. You opened it up. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then you go off to sleep, leave it up on your screen. I would be locked out. I would not be able to modify it. I would not be able to go in and look at it because you're in there and locked it. Now they've changed it so that I could go in there and see it as read only. And then there's some overwriting. I don't know if I could overwrite you. I know that if I have a different tab open as an editor and I have another tab, I try to open it again, I'll say, hey, you've got this open in another tab. Do you want to overwrite? And you could. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. So you're opening it up for other people to make changes and possibly sort of lock you out or
if you're going to do that, make sure you're in a good communication. Darren and I oftentimes will be working together on an app somewhere, and we always make sure that we ask, hey, are you in? I'm getting ready to go in. Are you in? To make sure that the person can get out so that the other person can get in, just to make sure,
Yeah. Kurt could have been in the middle of writing some nasty code inside of a loop that's got nested if statements and all this stuff. And I go in there, I'm like, he's in there, but I'm going to override him because this is my time to edit it. And he didn't do a save, and you know what I mean? Well, you could essentially sort of throw away some of his work if he didn't either save or it wasn't saving every 2 minutes. So just sort of keep those things in mind. So those are some good points to bring up there, Kurt. Let's bring this up. Okay. You now know how to save, publish, share your app with others, incorporating images in media. So we brought in an image control. Now there's other controls like a camera app that allows you to tie into the cameras on the device. So that's something that you can take a look at. I do have videos on that if you wanted to know more about that, but we did use a little bit of media with the image control. Implementing basic search functionality. Well, we didn't quite get to that. So, and that could probably just take us a moment or two. Of course, those are my famous last words, right?
To be fair, that we've covered some of the stuff's kind of advanced, really, if you think about it. We're getting into some pretty. I don't know how to say it. We're doing some dangerous maneuvers now.
Really?
For Power Apps.
Dangerous maneuvers. And right now, I guess we're Have you ever heard somebody say, I know enough to be dangerous? Now you guys know enough to be dangerous. So what we could do is we could filter this, or it's actually search. Let's say we're searching for a specific joke, okay? And maybe we want to search all of them. So I'll do this here, okay?
Yeah, Matt asked in the private chat how to make power apps look better than a power app. He was like, "What? what is that?" Yeah, that's a saying that we always have is we don't want our power apps to look like a power app. And that's because oftentimes when people use power apps, especially in the beginning, they use forms. And I guess forms have their place. You know, they're good. They're good for beginners that don't know how to code yet. But your power app's going to look like that. It's going to look like some kind of a self-generated form, and it's not going to have that look and feel. Like right here, Darren's app right here doesn't really look like a power app, you know, and that's because he's designed that. First of all, he's in Canvas. He's in a Canvas app, and he's got more control over stuff. And he makes his programs look nice. Don't make it look like it's just been thrown together, you know.
Yeah, you can notice whenever you eat a meal, if the chef made it with love or not. You go to a fast food place and it was just all slopped together. All 3 pickles are stacked up, and you take a bite out of it, and you're like, well, this wasn't made with love. I create all my apps with love. So
yeah, and you know, this is why I think Darren and I work together as a team pretty well, because I don't really care as much about the interface as Darren does. Darren, in fact, I used to poo-poo Darren a lot about it. Like, Darren, you know what? You got to worry about the engine. Make the damn thing work first, and then worry about what it looks like. And then Darren comes at me and says, you know, here's the thing, Kurt, your program might run like a Maserati, but if your user sees that program for the first time, that app for the first time, and it looks sloppy, they're making a first impression on that. And so now they won't even look at your Maserati, you know? And,
Kurt, you know the difference between you and me? I make this look good.
You know,
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
but it's true though. And so, you know, I have since spent a little bit more time working on my interface. Of course, I come back from the days of assembler when everything was black and white and monochrome screens. And so we didn't have a whole lot of interface to work with. So, and it was all about trying to make things run fast and efficient. I think something needs to be said about making a nice, beautiful user interface too. So, but to say all that, it'd be the best world is to have a Maserati that looks like a Maserati, you know? Right.
That's true. It looks nice and it functions great. Now, I've got the same screen up here, and I want to make sure that we cover a little bit of search, because that might be something that you might want to have in a basic app, right? So I'm going to use the search function. What is it I'm going to search? Well, it's going to be the data source as the first parameter. What's the text by which we're searching? Well, we do have a text input called txt search, and we're going to use the text property. Now, what is the column that we want to search for? Well, I just want to look inside the joke text. And I believe if I double click on this collection here, it's not going to show it to me. If I go look at the data real quick. It actually is called joke. That's what I thought it was. Okay. So here in the search, if I say joke, oh, you know what? It expects the column name to be inside of double quotes as a string. Okay, now it doesn't like what I have here. I've got some red squigglies. It says the search function has some invalid arguments. Kurt, what am I messing up here?
Okay, so the search field needs to be in the variable field, not the display field, I think. Am I right about that?
So you said the search.
So you've got search. Your third parameter is the field that you're going to search in.
Yeah, the column name.
That needs to be delimited with double quotes, but I think it also needs to be the variable name, not the display name of the field. So the CR4, whatever that is, the
oh, Okay.
Whatever you call that.
Yeah, I almost wish it would give me the full.
It should give you that.
All the columns. So it's confused somehow for some reason. So I'm going to say joke. Now, I'm going to make sure. I don't think this collection has been initialized. So I'm going to click on clear collect again. And now I'm hoping that we get a full list of yeah, why isn't this is something that I could do in my sleep here, but for some reason when you go live or you present, nothing works the way that you want it to, right?
Nope.
Did I spell search right? Sometimes we got search and we got a red squiggly here, has some invalid arguments. Okay. So if I hit comma, look at this, Kurt. It's giving me yeah, that's sort of weird.
Well, that's what I was talking about. That's what you needed. That CR833. That's the variable name. I call that the variable name of the field.
Yeah. So I'm used to doing that if Power Apps is confused about something, and I don't know what confused it, but hey, let's try this out here. So we got a scarecrow, we got a fish. Let's see how many jokes we have about fish. Look at that. What do you call a fish wearing a crown? Why do we have duplicates on there like that? That's sort of weird.
I think your AI did that.
When I asked it for more and more dad jokes, it just repeated this stuff again.
Said, okay, I'll give you more.
Funny?
You got to ask it. You got to say, I want different ones. Yeah. Got burnt.
Yeah. So that is how search happens. I'm a little surprised it asked me to do the CR, but turns out in this instance, Kurt, you're right. You're not always right, Kurt, but when you're right.
Well, I want to ask you, Darren. Okay, I always assumed that's the way it was. Of course, now I came in when I came in, that's what was required when I learned how to do that search.
Yeah.
But you're saying no, that's not the case. Oftentimes, you just use the display name of the field, huh?
Yeah, I'm going to have to admit, even though there are certain things that are basics that I just don't use hardly at all.
Right.
One example is a form. I don't use forms, but it's something that you should learn as the basics. Now, search, I don't typically use search because a lot of times it's not delegable to the data source, and I'll use starts with a filter.
Yeah.
So maybe this is, and a lot of times when you're doing Power Apps development, 70% of the time or 70% of the developers out there are using SharePoint and not Dataverse because they don't have the premium license. And in that case, you don't have this weird CR833. So guys, a Dataverse database is actually a SQL Server database underneath the scenes. Just has some features bolted onto it to make it more user-friendly.
Yeah.
But this is actually the native name of the column in SQL Server. Okay, so that's where that comes from.
Yeah, I call that the variable name of the field. Can we go to the data source real quick? And so we can just demonstrate with that where you see that at?
Absolutely. Let's go down here to tables. Okay, and I'm going to go over to custom. I'm going to go find my dad joke table. And I'm going to click on columns. And let's go find joke.
Yeah.
Okay. It's called joke, but if you scroll down here, you'll notice the schema name. It's got this CR833 underscore.
Logical name. Same thing. And that's where I call the variable name, logical name. That's your, but that's sometimes things. Now he just talked about SQL Server. That's what SQL Server sees it as,
Yeah. Yeah. So now you guys know about search. Okay, we want to make sure that we're well-rounded on the basics here. We've done basic search, understanding how to trigger simple flows. Now, I wouldn't call that basics of using Power Apps, so I'm not going to cover that. I mean, we could, but we've been going. This session has been going for a while, so I'm going to leave that unchecked for now. But we have worked with basic variables, collections, techniques for testing and debugging. We touched on that a little bit by using variables showing what's underneath things. A lot of times a label is what you use a lot of times to troubleshoot what's going on. Is that right? Do you find that to be true for you, Kurt, as well?
Labels and notify.
Yeah. And there are some monitoring tools. I wouldn't classify that as under the basics, but maybe more intermediate level type of material. So changing control properties based on conditions. We've definitely done that a few times during this session. Provide user feedback and simple error messages. Although we didn't specifically do that, you could do that with a label and say, I guess we sort of did that when we did the switch statement. We had radio buttons and we were providing feedback based on what they clicked on, saying like NA. Well, hey, make sure you enter a numeric value, or hey, this field is required,
And some of these topics we just covered a little bit of it, but we could actually do entire live streams on some of these.
Yeah. And so Matt said it here in the private chat, we controlled it so it wouldn't have an error. How do you like that, Kurt?
Yeah.
So sometimes some people think, oh, control, that's you're a control freak. That's a bad thing. Well, in programming, it's sort of a positive thing. You want to have control over everything. And absolutely. So where to go from here, from the basics? Well, I recommend my free crash course that I provide. I actually used to sell the crash course. I used to call it the master class, where it goes over a lot of the basics, things that you would want to learn from somebody who has mastered a technology. And I just offer it for free there in my community. The link's at the top. I go through the 10 things that you should know before building your first Power Apps app. And then there's also a module on building a real app, building the app in a day. Okay. That's what I'd recommend. After you feel like you've been exposed to all these basics, put it to work, build a nice little app, and you're well on your road, on your journey to mastering Power Apps. So I like it. And the burning question that should be in your mind is, what video should you watch next? And YouTube thinks you're going to like this video next. Let's see if they're right. Or you can select this playlist, which I've selected for you based on the content you're currently watching. Guys, got to hurry. Click one of them. Otherwise, YouTube's going to autoplay some other video, which you probably don't want.